All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first webinar in the Jare Trading Psychology Masterclass. We are extremely excited to be bringing you a resource that you'll be able to refer back to for the entirety of your trading careers. That's our goal. And before we get into it, we have a little bit of housekeeping. First, as people have already asked, this is being recorded. Everything is being recorded, and it'll be available in the course for you to watch as many times as you wish starting tomorrow. And additionally, we want this experience to be as absolutely interactive as possible. We'll be running through exercises with prompts, and to really get the most out of the series, we highly encourage you to participate along in the chat. And also, during the webinar, please leave any questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. If you see on the Zoom interface, we've got the chat. We've also got the Q&A section. That's where you should put any questions you have. Feel free to leave comments and kind of reactions in the chat. But if you really want me to ask a question to Jared, leave it in that Q&A section. And if you like a question that's being asked, you can go ahead and upvote it. Additionally, on questions, try to keep them as related to the current webinar and the current content we are discussing. We'll be covering a lot in the future webinars, but try to keep everything focused on the current material. And feel free to ask questions at any time. With all that covered, I'm super excited to introduce your instructor for the series, Jared Tendler. Jared, as many of you know, is the author of The Mental Game of Trading, and Jared has worked for over 16 years with hundreds of traders, PGA Tour golfers, and champion poker players, teaching them his framework and helping them improve their mental games. And over the course of this masterclass, he'll be teaching you his system and how to apply to get the most out of your trading. I know I personally learned an immense amount in the past few months working with Jared to develop this curriculum. And our goal, as I said, is to really create a resource that you can refer back to in the many years to come. So with that said, Jared, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you for all your help creating this, and to everybody at Trader Lion. It's been amazing working with you guys. And so, yeah, welcome everybody. I'm excited to kind of finally kick this off. It's been months in the making. And yeah, I mean, I'm just eager to get in the trenches and help all of you get to that next level. I'll be honest, like I love this. I love to have an opportunity to help all of you actually crack through the problems that are standing in your way. At the same time, I understand that there's a lot of people here with various levels of experience in trading, various levels of experience in my material. And so I take the opportunity very seriously and embrace the challenge to try to help every single one of you, because I know how much it matters to you, and it matters to me that you're able to get the help that you need and develop the success that you want. 25 years ago, after choking, trying to qualify for the US Open, I needed what you were going to get from me in this series. I did not have the answers, and sports psychology, the material that was available to me at the time, didn't help me. And so my dream of playing professional golf really was thwarted because my mental game was not up to par, and I didn't have the answers that I needed. But I also knew that I wasn't alone. I knew that there were many others like me who had the game to compete, but just didn't have the mentality to actually prove it. And so for me as a coach, I have been dedicated to finding answers, to creating systems, honing strategies to make sure that no one suffers the same fate that I did all those years ago. But ironically, this webinar comes at a time when I am actually getting ready to play some serious competitive golf again. And over the next couple of years, I'm going to be kind of make it a pretty good go playing in some big tournaments. But I will say that, like, had I made it on tour, I'm obviously not going to say that I would be upset by that, to fulfill a dream. But I also know that I wouldn't feel as fulfilled. Golf is selfish in a sense. It's like, it's just for me, and I've grown a ton as a result of my failures, my successes, learned a lot about myself, and I continue to learn more about what it takes to be great in terms of performance. But coaching is something special, and I do treat it as such. And over the years, I've come to see how much of an impact I can have on somebody's life. There's just nothing else like it, to be honest. And as a coach, to have the potential to impact all of you in a positive way is really an incredible thing. And so I'm excited to get started with all of you today. So as we get started today, let's get a little sober here, okay? Because you must understand that my ability to help you is dependent on the work that you put in, okay? It's the same with my clients. Right? I'm not a magician. If I was, I can promise you what I was selling would cost a lot more. Okay. But I can't change you, right? I can't change you the same way that you can't go to a personal trainer and have them just give you muscles. Okay. I can give you fresh perspective. I can teach you how the brain works and why you're struggling. I can provide you a system, which is what this whole webinar series is about, right? To help you organize your work. But at the end of the day, there is no other way, right? You have to put in the work. Now, I'm going to make that easier for you. That's really my whole job, I believe, right? To help make this process easier. But I strongly suggest that over the next 8 weeks, right, that you take the time, carve out the time, ramp up your level of productivity, ramp up your focus, put in the extra work, and maybe make decisions in your life that will give you more time to actually be able to do that. Now, I know that that's not feasible for all of you, right? And don't worry if circumstances in life don't allow that, or if you're even viewing the series after it's recorded, you're still going to be able to get a lot from this series. I've certainly worked very hard to make sure that that is true. But if you can make the time, right, carve it out, because you're going to have the ability to get direct feedback from me as though you were a client of mine, right? I'm not going to be lecturing the entire time. Today, maybe there'll be a little bit more than optimal, but the majority of this series is designed to be the exact opposite, where I'm going to be reviewing your materials that you send in. I'm going to be detailing scenarios that are described, by many of you, right? You have the ability to shape the direction of the series based on the work that you put in. And so the harder you work, the better I can do my job, right? This is a collaboration, just like it is when I'm working with a client. I'm not here as like an expert who is telling you what to do. I'm here as an expert collaborating with you because you are an expert on yourself. And if you're not yet, well, then that's part of the process, right? But that's what it's really all about. Okay. Now, I will be honest, right? For those that are not as familiar with my work, right? Aspects of it can be challenging. Okay. And the reason is because sports psychology for me was just too easy. It was like, all right, well, I was choking under pressure. So the answers I got were effectively, right? Relax, take deep breaths, just pretend like it's just a normal round, right? All of these ideas that were, that sounded good in theory, right? And in general, actually it worked. I mean, I was a 3-time All-American in college. I won 9 tournaments in college, but I kept getting into spots, trying to qualify for the US Open, the US Amateur, like the big national events. It was like nothing had changed. And so that is not what my system is all about. And as I see it, a lot of the trading psychology material that's out there, look, it's very good. Just like the golf psychology and sports psychology material, it's good. And for those of you or those of whom it works, great. But if you're like me and you needed something more systematic, right, then that's what we need. We need an actual system, right? And that's in general what I see with a lot of trading psychology material. It's kind of like stock picking, right? A lot of good ideas, but there's not something systematic that you can rely on time and time again if you're not able to get over the hump and really understand what is causing problems like FOMO and greed, right? Why you're violating your system constantly. I mean, these things, if they were easy to have solved, right, you would have done that already, right? But you're here because those ideas were sort of easy to say, right? It's like, it's easy to say, sit on your hands and don't greedily jump into a trade. And quite another, to actually be able to stop yourself when you see other people making money and you're not, right? It's easy to say, right? Losing is part of trading, right? And you should, of course, always adhere to your stops and, take losses as you should. But then when you're in a drawdown and then, couple trades today, you get stopped out by a tick and all of a sudden your mind convinces you like, oh yeah, you can just play around with your stop a little bit, right? It's easy to say what the right mentality is for trading. But how do you actually adopt it day in and day out through the craziness that is thrown at you? Trading is an intense form of competition. It is going to draw out every single weakness you have, and whatever you think you should be doing, if you're not able to do it, you need to understand why, right? And all the advice in the world is not going to be able to stop it if you don't understand why this is happening. And so we're going to get that today, okay? And so what you were going to get from me is my experience and my expertise, having been in the trenches with elite traders from institutional firms and many traders who are just like you. And what I will say is that the institutional traders struggle with the exact same issues. Okay. So you can relax a little bit as if they have something that you don't. What they have is they've been vetted, right? They've gone through many sort of cycles and phases to almost like get drafted, like you were, getting drafted in the NFL. But many of you are, playing backyard football and then just decide like, oh yeah, today I'm going to play in the NFL today. Right. I mean, there's a pretty decent sized jump. Right. And so what you are going to get from me is a system. You have a system, right, or a strategy. So it only makes sense that you have a system for this side of the game as well. All right. Now I'm saying all of this just to preface again, right? You're going to need to review this material again and again. It's complicated. You got to work at it, right? For some of you, things are going to click. You're going to be off and running, and that's great. But for others, the challenge is going to be greater, right? And I don't want that challenge to deter you, right? Stick with it, because if it's hard, what does that mean? It only means that relative to what you expected, relative to your goals, relative to where you thought you were, you just have farther to go. That's it. Does not mean that you can't get there. Do not misinterpret that signal, right? You know the importance of recognizing signals in the right way, okay? So having this work be hard is not the problem. Giving up. That's it. That's the problem, right? Then you guarantee you won't get there, and that's not acceptable to me, and it's certainly not acceptable to you, okay? So this process is going to be a little bit like going to a personal trainer, right? Some of you think you can just, walk in the door and start bench pressing 200 pounds when you can actually only bench press 40, okay? And I'll be honest, this happened to me recently, about 8 months ago. Maybe not the 200 pound part. I knew I was a little bit more objective about where I was, but I was 43, right? My golf game had slowly deteriorated in terms of my swing speed and my, like, how far I could hit the ball and my accuracy. And so I started seeing a coach again, and then he recommended that I go see a trainer. And we worked in the right way. We worked in a very foundational, systematic way where I actually wasn't even lifting any weights for the first 4 to 5 months or 4 to 5 weeks, because I didn't realize how much mobility, how much my spine had compressed. I mean, there was just so much things that you don't realize. I'm sitting in a chair all the time that, was really impairing me. So, I had not had a lot of success with personal trainers before. Every single one of them had hurt me in some way. I'd gotten injured from going to a trainer, which is like the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do, but not one of them worked my body in the right way, because they weren't diagnostically looking and analyzing at what I needed, until I found a trainer who actually understand how to create the functional movement that was required. And so, I'm happy to say 8 months later that my golf swing is almost back to where it was when I was 20, right? My swing speed is only 3 or 4 miles an hour slower than it was back then. I was swinging like at 118. Now I'm, up to like 110, 112 on some days. So that is what we're going to do in this webinar series. We're going to work your mind in a very functional way and build it in the right way so that it can sustain for the entirety of your career, right? So many of you go through these big ups and downs, right? You have pockets of time where you get past greed and FOMO and the anger issues, but then it just kind of comes back, right? And not being able to actually systematically move yourself forward is really a travesty. So we're going to work in the right way and make sure that you get the work that you need. Okay. So occasionally, before I get started with a new client, someone will ask me, hey, what is somebody who's been successful working with you, working on their mental game? And of course, you wouldn't be surprised that the kind of person who's even going to ask that question is somebody who's going to have some success, right? And it means that they're already open to improvement, and thinking in the right way, right? And they're curious and open-minded, okay? They're looking to learn and don't presume to know all the details. So some of you are more familiar with my material, right? I'm certain that you know some of the things that you're going to learn today, right? And it'll be a reinforcement of it. And that's honestly fine, right? Mastery is not about learning something once. Mastery is learning it so well that you can't get it wrong, right? That is mastery. So yeah, reinforcement is not a problem. But I promise you that you are going to learn some new things today, even if you already think you know the material quite well. Okay, so the idea of curiosity and open-mindedness, to me, is one of the first traits that I think is important, because the mental game can be challenging, right? It's very, very easy to get self-critical of yourself, right? You're violating your rules, you're overtrading out of anger, you're unable to size up when you know you should. You have the shoulds drum beating in your mind about what you ought to be doing, and you can't get yourself to do it. And so curiosity in those moments is hard, but curiosity is actually what you need. because criticism slows down the learning process. And in some instances, actually completely derails it. And like learning is at the heart of what we are trying to do. Like I said, I'm not going to give you muscles. I'm giving you a foundation and a system so you can learn how to build muscles in your mind, right? Proverbially. And so if the learning process gets derailed, well, then you're not going to actually be able to strengthen your mind and address the problems that need to be addressed. So you are here, right, because you have problems that you have not been able to solve, right? Whether it's selling too soon out of fear or entering too soon out of FOMO, right? Every single problem that you have is more complicated than you think it is, period. You would not be here if that was not the case, okay? So despite what new insights you may gain today or in the next several webinars, you're right, you may continue to struggle correcting these problems. There will likely be ups and downs, and that's okay. That is expected. That is what happens with nearly every single one of my clients, including the institutional ones. Right? I just had a conversation with a guy a couple of days ago, right, who I hadn't seen in 8 months, and he was wondering why he was struggling for 6 of those, right? Struggling for 6 months. He knows that he can reach out to me, right? But was just caught in this loop thinking that he could figure it out. And it's so easy to get caught up in that, right? But now you need to actually bake in some curiosity here, bake in some open-mindedness so they'd be able to kind of learn something different, because clearly what you have now might be good, but it's not enough. Now, I also say open-mindedness because for many of you, the biggest problem is not the greed, it's not the FOMO, it's not the overconfidence, right? Your biggest problem is how you view those problems. Think about that. The biggest problem is how you view those problems. You're stuck in the forest and you can't see the trees, right? You don't really know, or you're in the forest and you don't even know what is a tree. What is a leaf? What's a rock? You're not skilled enough to be able to understand and how to navigate yourself through all this. And if I do my job well, then I've given you perspective on how to solve those problems. Not only just what you can solve today, but give you a perspective that's going to solve things infinitely into the future. And that's what the entire webinar series is all about. It's not just about today. It's planting seeds, right? Forming a foundation that is going to serve you for the rest of your trading career. All right. So now the next thing I think is very important, right, is a passionate commitment to your goals. I know all of you are motivated. There's not a question that is the case, right? Your presence here kind of confirms that, right? But I wonder how many of you are beginning to doubt how well you're going to be able to achieve your goals, get past your problems, climb to the heights that you aspire towards. Mental game problems can be a bit like an injury. Some of you can't recognize that mentally you've kind of torn your ACL. Right? We don't get like an MRI where you can, go to the hospital, get an MRI and prove that you actually have an ACL injury. Okay? And so there's difficulty sometimes with this mental game stuff, right? It's confusing, right? You're going to go through periods, right? Like I said before, where you make some progress, but then slip up. And is it technical? Is it mental? Is it, okay, well, I'm doing my pre-market prep and I'm looking at charts, but is it me? Is it the markets? It can be hard, right? And especially when you've got these injuries, they can start to kind of wear on that hope, and you can become a little bit less hopeful that you can actually get to where you want. So at least for right now, right, the next 8 weeks, if there is any of that crustiness in there, let's just suspend that perspective and maybe just view what you're dealing with right now as an injury. Because if it was a physical injury, it would feel a lot more legitimate than maybe the injury mentally that you feel, right? And for me, that's actually a fairly accurate representation of what's happening, right? And for a lot of my clients, thinking about their mental game problems as an injury actually helps them. It provides a little bit of a framework to view it, right? Because the progression is going to feel, if you tear your ACL, right, rehab's 9 months if you're a professional athlete. It's 12 to 15 months if you're not, right? And I'm not saying that it's going to take you 12 to 15 months to solve your problems, but it might take you 12 to 15 months to get to the point where you're actually aspiring towards right now. And that is not uncommon. Some of you are going to experience progress a lot faster, right? It just means your injury wasn't as severe. For some of you, the injury is more severe. But the problem is right now, we don't know which is which. Okay. So just get rid of any of the despair or the hopelessness and just stay committed to your goals. Stay committed to this process for the next 8 weeks and let's freaking get at it. Okay. And so push yourself hard and let's see where we go. And so then this last thing here I think is important is, right, the willingness to get out of your comfort zone, be a researcher or an experimenter. And this is another perspective that I think has helped a lot of clients, especially in the short term, where we might say, all right, you know what, for the next month, right, I want you to suspend focus on results. And, a common example where this would occur is traders who are trying to get through like a combine, trying to get funded in a prop account, like, scenarios like that, where oftentimes the pressure to make it is so great. Now, there's a lot of scenarios in trading where that pressure can be high, right? Let's say you've maybe just started trading for the first time professionally, now being, kind of your entire income, right? The pressure sometimes can make it be too great and your execution goes down, right? What you were able to do, in a more relaxed period of time goes away. And the sort of swirling chaos of intensity just makes things a lot harder, right? And so if you just say, all right, for the next month, or for us, the next 8 weeks, I'm going to suspend the pressure, the urgency that I'm putting myself under, right? Like I said, if you're trying to jump too far too fast, right, sometimes you can't, really allow the kind of learning that's really necessary to occur. Like imagine if you were watching a toddler learning to walk, and then every time they fell, you yelled at them. I mean, what kind of an a-hole would do that, right? And yet that's kind of what you're doing to yourself at times, right? Where you're so much in a box, right, that you're not letting yourself be a toddler. And I'm not saying that you're a toddler in a sense as a trader. I'm saying you are a toddler in a sense of letting yourself work the process at this time in a more open-minded way that lets you learn what you need to get through this. Okay. All right. So with that kind of firmly in the background, let's talk about the goals for the webinar series. So by the end of the series, I want you to be in a position to be solidly on the road towards improvement, right? If that hasn't happened already. So let's look at how we're going to do this, right? So you're going to learn a system for your mind, right? And one that you can use again and again and again, okay? We're going to be working together much like you were a one-on-one client, right? So treat this as a one-on-one client, right? Answer the questions that I pose to you, right? This is not intended to be a one-way street, right? There's a workbook. This is a workshop, right? I know it's called a webinar series, masterclass. They're just names, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is more of a workshop. We are working together intensively in the trenches, right? So I strongly encourage you to do all that work. All right. Understanding key elements of how your mind works, learning how to troubleshoot your toughest hurdles, right? Big priority here, and preparing for continued improvement after the series, right? As I said before. So just a little bit of housekeeping as well here. During each webinar, we are going to be taking a few breaks. Okay. So today we're going to take a break in about maybe 40 minutes. At that point, I may run to the bathroom, get some more water, but I'll come back quickly and start answering some questions. Break will end up being about 5-10 minutes in general. And then we'll have, probably go to the end. We'll take another break at that point. If anybody wants to do anything else, but I will stay and answer questions kind of another 20 minutes, depending on how many there are. As Richard said earlier, you can ask questions at any time. He may interrupt me if there's something kind of really significant as I kind of get into the material here a little bit more. That's totally fine. But I'll certainly try to answer all the questions that are coming through during that first break. What I will say is that I will be getting progressively more detailed and specific in the scenarios and common problems, that we're dealing with, right? Today, it is very important that we are all on the same page of the foundational elements of the system. We need to be able to speak the same language here, right? And I can promise, right, everybody that's read the Mental Game of Trading, right, there are some who have misinterpreted what I said, right? But all of you that have read it, right, you've got a background. I promise there's more that you're going to be able to learn here, right? And I don't want you to get sort of succumb to this confirmation bias where you think that you know what I'm going to say, right? So again, stay open-minded, stay curious, even as we're going through this material today. Okay. What I will say, right, is that this communication medium can sometimes be hard. Like when I'm working with a client, I get immediate feedback all the time, right? But here we're working with a lot of you, and there's a lot of variety. Again, with the experience that you have, and so for me, right, my priority is making sure that every single one of you leaves the end of this webinar series in a position to continue to make progress if you haven't already. Okay, so it's possible that you may have misinterpreted something that I said in what you know before. Stay open-minded. Okay. But I promise you that there's more that you're going to be able to learn. And at a minimum, if you just sort of free yourself up to be open-minded, you're guaranteed that you will. All right. So having talked a little bit about what I'm going to cover, I want to just very, very quickly talk about what I'm not going to cover. Okay. The term trading psychology, I think, kind of has a lot of different connotations in the trading psychology world. To some, it means like how your personality affects your trading style, or the markets that you're interested in, how you sort of see potential profitability in certain markets. Right? I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into behavioral finance or market psychology. Okay, I am interested in helping you to make the most of what you currently have. Okay, it is on you if you want to change your system and make it more, make it fit you more. But what I will say is that oftentimes, if you go through the work that we're going to do, you may be able to find more opportunity in your existing system. There's or kind of naturally start to adapt it in ways versus sort of forcing it. A lot of you sometimes change your strategies because you're looking for an answer. Right? You're looking for the one indicator that's going to sort of solve your struggles, and that's not really going to happen. All right. Now, I will say that decision making is kind of one of these things that I think gets a little bit of confused in the trading psychology world as well. Right? There's a lot of people that look at decision making as psychology, right? But decision making is more of your technique, right? Equivalent to my golf swing, right? There's technique in how you actually go through and make decisions, right? And if you look at that technique and the ways that it breaks down, well, yeah, then we can look at the greed and the FOMO and the discipline issues and the things from a psychological angle that impair that decision making. But at the end of the day, if your decision making process is rock solid, it becomes a buffer against some of those mental game weaknesses. So in my mind, it is separate. And while we will be talking about it throughout this series, we're going to be talking about more from a mental and emotional standpoint and the ways that it gets impaired, not necessarily in ways that you can enhance it more effectively. Okay. Now, I will say that the bulk of my attention in this webinar series is going to be on the discipline, greed, fear, confidence issues, overconfidence, lack of confidence. Those are kind of the big five problems in my opinion. But I do understand how a lot of these sort of peripheral, secondary, kind of topics can really become like the X factor in what is causing somebody to struggle, right? So finding the right balance between trading in your life, developing an optimal routine, how to avoid burnout, right? There's other topics like this that will come up that you may be interested in, and you are welcome to talk about it, but just know that the bulk of my focus is going to be on those big five. Okay, so let's just talk about goals for today. Okay, so primarily you're going to learn the primary elements of my system. You're going to understand the key rules of the mental game. We're going to bust some commonly held myths. We're going to do a deep dive in the big five psychological problems. And I'm going to lay out the first step that you're going to take today. Among a lot of independently minded people, those that tend to be a bit more skeptical by nature, maybe go against the grain, had a lot of experience working with people like that in poker. And I know that many of you were that way as well. So you're not the type that's just going to kind of blindly accept what somebody in my shoes is going to tell them. And so that's why it's important that I go over some of the rules of the mental game and kind of bust some of the myths. But they're all based on hard science, right? I've selected principles and theories that have come from years and years of research. There's no kind of made up BS here. Okay. And so lastly, at the end of the webinar, I will go into very good detail on the homework, right? What you were going to do in the next 2 weeks, and what we're going to, and Richard will kind of walk through how you'll actually do that. Okay. But we're actually going to start with a pop quiz. So I want you to grab a pen, open up a Word doc, find some place where you can write it down, but you have 1 minute. We're going to time it. You have 1 minute to write down your biggest or most costly trading mistakes. And if Richard is ready on the timer, then we're good. Let's go.
All right, we've got about 30 seconds left, everybody. I can hear the pencils scratching on paper, Jared.
Love it. Hopefully nobody's choking here. And if you are, then you know the pressure is something you got to deal with.
All right, 5 seconds.
Do, 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 do.
And pencils down.
All right. Pencils down. All right. We're going to do a quick poll here, and I want to find out how hard or easy this task was for you. All right. So, you got the poll up here?
Yep.
Perfect.
There
All
it
right.
is.
So, everybody just kind of go in there, answer this real quick, and, while we're waiting for the results, I want to share with you why I did this. All right. So, first off, your biggest or most costly trading mistakes are almost guaranteed to be caused by greed, fear, anger, or problems with confidence or lacking of confidence. And as we begin to dive into the system, I want you to have those primary mistakes that you want to fix very clear in your mind, because that is what this entire webinar series is all about, right? Is being able to solve this stuff, right? I mean, obviously, we're going to create a foundation for you to solve future issues as well, but we got to take care of these things first before we can even get to do that. Okay, so everything that we're doing needs to have a direct impact on all that stuff. And if you had trouble recognizing it, right, if you didn't know it top of mind, well, then how are you going to recognize it in the moments that matter? Okay, so for anybody that had trouble completing this task, 1 minute is plenty of time to list out your biggest mistakes. Maybe you have a lot of them, okay, but if you know them like the back of your hand, even a minute is plenty of time to be able to do that. Okay, so I don't want any of you to have a rough idea of your biggest mistakes. I want them to be very, very clear. And as we look at some of the results here, okay, so 60% of you said it was easy to very easy, 3% very hard, 23% was hard. So yeah, 26% of you got some work to do to make sure that this is top of mind and very clear. Now, I know that for some of you, it may be because you've actually made some progress, right? I know that your clients see this all the time, right? They make some progress, and then they kind of get into this sort of middle zone where it's harder to define exactly what they're struggling with. But at the end of the day, it's important that we have a clear idea of what those are. Otherwise, what are you really working towards, right? Okay, moving on. So let's get to work, but we're going to work in the right way. Okay, some of you want to just dive right in and have me give you answers and solve your problems immediately, right? Sort of the magician in the back of your mind, right? But I promise that we are going to work towards that end, but maybe just not exactly in the way that you expect, right? And let's remember why you're here. You're here because you have not found the answers to permanently get past the issues holding you back. You have not reached your goals. So I am not going to just send you back into the market unprepared, only to get steamrolled and revert back to where you previously were. All right. I want to give you a fighting chance. And so today begins the right preparation to get you back into battle in the right way. And so that means you got to sharpen your axe. And, our good friend here, Abe Lincoln, sums up, I think, how you need to be thinking about this. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. That's what we're going to do. Let's start sharpening that axe. All right. So I've said this a few times, right? Those of you who are already familiar with the material, right? You kind of know what's coming, but there's going to be some nuances that you are going to learn that can make a big difference. So let's stay with it. All right. So step 1 of the system is called mapping your pattern. Okay. The trading mistakes you want to fix, the trading mistakes you just wrote down, they happen in repetitive patterns again and again and again. And while that is frustrating, while it causes doubt, while it lowers confidence, there is a big opportunity that comes when it happens in patterns like this, right? Because you profit on your ability to see patterns. And all we got to do is just weaponize that skill and apply it to yourself and learn the indicators in yourself to develop mastery of your own mind. That's what this step is all about. Okay, step 2 is called getting to the root of the problem. Okay, so greed, fear, FOMO, anger, discipline problems, right? They are problems. I'm not going to debate that. But as I said before, what is causing them? You don't know the answer to that, right? If that's a question that you've never even asked before, right? It's an important one, okay? Because the answer to actually permanently eliminating these mistakes comes from answering that question. Step 3 is correcting the problem. Okay, now once you understand the problem, understand what's causing it, correcting it is a lot easier, right? But you still have to do it the right way. Otherwise, your knowledge can get wasted. And I am certain that there are some of you in this room right now who have the knowledge, but you're not applying it in the right way. And step 4, which we're going to get to in the last webinar, is repeat and adapt. Again, you're learning a system that you can use again and again. And for me, I kind of look at the mental game as like an engine. So in a way, you're kind of become, I'm going to train you how to become a mechanic, right? I've kind of likened that to myself. A lot of people ask, well, how can you help me when you're not a trader yourself? And what I would say is that a mechanic on a race car, let's say a high performance F1 race car, right? They do not need to drive the car, or they don't need to know how to drive the car in the same way the driver does, but they need to understand how the car is going to perform at its best. They need to know how to diagnose issues and keep it well maintained. That is my job, right? So I'm not a trader. I'm not a poker player. I wasn't an esport athlete, right? But my system has applied very well in all 3 of those domains. Of course, obviously, when I'm working with golfers, I can talk about things that I can't in other places. But listen, I've worked with traders for 9 years now. I know what you all go through at the highest level and at the lowest level. All right. So let's get into some specifics here. I'm going to give you some details and some overviews on each step, right? And then we'll take a break and come back and do more of this mapping your pattern work, because that's going to be the bulk of our focus today. Okay. The reason that the mapping your pattern is the first step is simple, because you can't stop something you can't see. And for many of you right now, you are in a position where it's kind of like a trade, right? You can't profit from a trade that you see afterwards, right? Hindsight is great because it might help you to understand what you could have done differently and you can learn from it. But if you are only able to see the anger, the FOMO, the greed, whatever, after you've made these mistakes, then you're never going to be able to actually correct it. So mapping your pattern creates the indicators so that you can actually see your problems occurring in real time. So you can actually do something different, right? So these repeatable patterns are going to get mapped and detailed out. And there's a lot of power that comes from being able to do that, right? It gives you the ability to do something different, right? So it's possible that some of you are going to see some immediate benefit from actually going through this step. It is possible. But I'd say for many, many people, you're actually going to end up in a spot that can be frustrating. So I'm just going to warn you of it now. Okay. You are going to become more aware of what's going on, but you're not yet going to be able to stop it. And that is going to be really frustrating. Okay. The first sign of progress in my system is greater real-time recognition, right, of these patterns, of your pattern that occurs with FOMO, right? And what would occur before the actual mistake itself. But you're not going to be able to stop it, right? It's going to be that same should, like you can see it, but that's why there's 2 other steps here, right? That's what brings us to the second step. That's why it exists, okay? So in order to kind of fully understand, A, like why that even occurs, but B, why it's so important to map your pattern, we've got to talk about emotion, because emotion is a subject that is, I think, widely misunderstood, not just within trading. And so let's look a little bit deeper here. Okay. So do you think about like what the ideal outcome is for your emotions? Is that a thought that you've had before, a question that you've had before? Because what I hear a lot is that emotions are bad. Sense that you would think that because they're sort of there, right, when all of the mistakes are made, but they're kind of like the innocent bystander. Right? They're present, but they're not actually the real cause. Right? And I'll get to more of that in a minute if that doesn't make sense to you. Okay. So the emotions themselves are not the problem. And a lot of you think of, wanting to become robotic, wanting to become numb or neutral, detached from your emotions, right? The stoicism, ideas have become kind of very commonplace in the world today. And I'm not saying that those ideas are bad if they're used in the short term. And if they're used when there's not underlying roots of the problems that are actually causing the scenario here. Okay. I mean, listen, it makes sense why you think emotions are the problem, right? I mean, you get raptured by anger and then get stopped out for the third time in a row, and that anger causes you to double your next position, right? That makes sense why you think the anger is the problem. Okay. But in fact, you need emotion. You need emotion to fuel you at your absolute best, right? Motivation, desire, interest, those are all part of the emotional system. And this graphic helps to show why that is true. So this is called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And if, for those who are not familiar with it, the Yerkes-Dodson law has been around for 100 years. And we know that it's been around for 100 years because if you look at that guy, arousal, it does not mean what you think it means. So get your head out of the gutter, right? What that means is that was just like the psychological term for emotion or stress back 100 years ago. Pressure, right? So we just basically use emotion, right? So the Yerkes-Dodson law basically looks at the relationship between performance and arousal or stress or emotion or stress, right? And so what we look at here is down in this kind of bottom left corner. If your emotion is too low, you suck, right? You're bored, you're disinterested, you're tired. You know, a lot of the kind of bored disinterest, is going to kind of exist here. Maybe a little burned out. You've been, coming back from a vacation and you're not quite yet, kind of in top shape yet in terms of your interest in trading again. Markets have been kind of rough. There's just not like a lot of action. So, your energy level is low. Well, you're going to suck as a result of that. And ironically, you're going to suck in equal ways as you would when your emotions get too high. So as you can see, right, emotions rise. And if they cross that sort of middle point where they're at their sort of optimal state, then it actually starts to shut down your ability to think, and you start to make mistakes. All the things you know you ought not to do, you still do. And it actually is in this zone right here where, that awareness of what you should do, happens, right? You're aware of what's going on, but you can't stop it. Same thing happens on this side, right? You're aware that you shouldn't be lazy. You're aware that you should, do a better pre-market prep, or that you should be reviewing charts and, whatever else it is that you do with your work, but you're kind of half-assing it a little bit and not working, quite as aggressively. Or again, awareness of what you ought to do, but not able to get yourself to not do it. What we're aiming here is to get at the top, right? This is that balance where you have the right amount of stress, the right amount of energy, the right amount of emotion, and the right mixture of it in order to sort of fuel you to be at your absolute best. And everybody's a little bit different in terms of what that means for yourself, right? So emotions get a bad rap, right? It seems like they're the problem, but yet we need them. The problem is what causes them to be excessive, right? On that right side of the curve, or causes them to be too low on the left side of the curve. That's what we're trying to figure out, is what is the cause of that isolation? Because when you get rid of that, automatically you are able to balance yourself at the top of that curve more and more often. And you can develop strategies to keep yourself more and more often, kind of at the top of the curve. Okay. Now, when we look at athletes, look at traders, every one of you, right, kind of has an ideal mixture of emotion that fuels them or fuels you to be at your best, right? Sometimes it can be a mixture of drive, just that pure motivation, that will to win, the will to make money, the will to execute your system. Sometimes it can be anger. Michael Jordan was famous for that. For some of you, it's fear, right? Sometimes it's, back up against the wall, right? And you need that kind of intensity to be at your absolute best, right? Others, you need to be in more of like kind of a calm state of mind where there's this sort of poise and peace and tranquility. Others need the market to be going nuts, right? Tons of opportunity, and your mind is kind of filled. If the market's actually too calm for you, right, then it's actually harder to get yourself in the zone. Or get yourself to that top of the curve here. So let's do another pop quiz. Okay. I will say that in general, right? I can tend to be a little bit too one-sided and focusing on the negative. But I think it's very important that you take time right now to understand the emotions that are present and the emotions that fuel you to be at your best. I want you to kind of write down what trading is like when it's at your absolute best, right? What is your energy like? What is your intensity like? Your motivation? What are your emotions like? What's your thought process like? Write down all of those details. Okay, and if you go to into the workbook on page 9, there's actually room for you to write this. So, Richard, why don't we put up 2 minutes on the clock? Give you a little bit more time because I think this is going to be harder. Give you another few more seconds to kind of find your place, get your pen, get your Word doc open, whatever you're going to write, and let's go.
Yep, your 2 minutes starts right now. And somebody asked, which out of the 3 workbooks? This is in the task booklet. So it's the orange cover. And it should be a trading at the best prompt at the top. Yeah, Jared, I saw you answer that question. Cool.
Yeah, I figured I'd just get to a couple quick ones.
Yep. All right, just about 10 more seconds. Last chance to write something down, and there we go. That's time.
All right, let's do another quick poll here. Same parameters. Let's see how hard or easy this task was for you.
Here we go.
All right, perfect. And again, while we're waiting for the results here, let me just kind of explain this. As I said, right, sometimes it's even my bias to focus too much on the negative stuff when actually for some clients, the answer has been, we need to have a clear target for what it's like at your best, and aspiring towards that, more frequently actually becomes the answer, right? And that typically happens after we have a better understanding of kind of what the causes are. But I think for a lot of you, you will benefit if you have a clear idea of what you're like when you're at your best. Also, it will make the mapping your pattern a heck of a lot easier if you have this, because what we're going to do is, again, put like a kind of a spotlight on that top of that curve and help you to begin looking at the subtleties, that kind of pull you down, or the subtleties that occur when you're getting kind of pulled down either side of those curves.
So I'll go ahead and stop the poll, and here are the results.
Okay. So similar numbers for the very hard section, maybe a little bit more in the neutral to easy. The very easy was a lot lower than the last one. So yeah, I mean, I think in general, I'm actually quite impressed. I think a vast majority of you being able to say very easily that this is, or that you understand what trading is like at your best is great. For those of you that don't have that clear yet, we're going to make this actually your first task. All right. So on that page, that next page, page 10, there are a number of other questions that can help you to tease out the details of what it's like at your best. And so like a lot of the things that I'm going to suggest you do, there really is sort of this iterative process that you need to go through where you write down some notes, which is what I force you to do now. But, the next time you're actually trading really well, take some notes down, go through these questions and review and try to create a tighter and tighter understanding of what trading is like at your best, because it's going to make the mapping the problems a lot easier, especially being able to describe those subtle signs that occur between your understanding or your awareness now versus where it ultimately needs to be. Okay. So the other reason that emotions are not as bad as some of you may think is because you can actually get them to the point where they can guide your trading decisions, right? Experienced traders use their emotions as a guide, right? And so for them, sometimes their intuition might show up as excitement, for example, when they see a massive opportunity, or it might show up as fear when the market regime has changed and they need to protect their capital. And that awareness, right, is not like cognitive. It's not a thought. Like, it's more of a feeling. It's a gut sense that doesn't have a lot of quite, a clear articulation quite yet. So in order to get to that point where your emotions can aid your decision-making like that, they need to be clear of the flaws and biases and illusions and wishes, personal needs that you push into the market and influence your perception of what's happening. Okay? All of that stuff is what causes your emotions to be too high or too low, right? And that is what's happening when you're not accessing intuition and when you're actually getting fooled by your emotions, right? Your emotions can masquerade. They can convince you that your thoughts are actually intuitive, actually based on your gut, when they're actually instead kind of based off of these flaws and biases and illusions. And that's often a trouble part. So, being able to kind of distinguish that pure intuition, right, gets easier when you go through the process I just described and kind of describing what trading is like at your best. Now, if you're a newer trader, I would strongly advise in the short term that you're not using intuition reliably. You might use it for, kind of broader based decisions that are kind of market based, like, in a particular sector. You might, have knowledge outside of trading that can help you identify maybe a long-term position in a stock, maybe more investment-like. But from a trading standpoint, you don't have enough experience yet to be able to have reliable, indicators from your emotions. Okay, so now that we're clear on the role of emotions in trading, let's just kind of get back to this mapping your pattern idea. And I want to make it very, very clear why mapping your pattern is so important. Why it's not even important, it's essential. Okay, so the Yerkes-Dodson law describes a function in the brain that I loosely call the malfunctioning mind. Some of you know this as the fight or flight mechanism. I'm not a fan of that term because it sort of implies something that is a bit too binary, right? You're either going to fight or you're going to run and flee, or, sometimes I'll say freeze too. But basically the idea is that when your emotional system becomes compromised, right, it actually causes you to do a lot of dumb stuff. But here's the problem. The emotional system has the power to shut down brain function, right? Thinking, planning, decision-making, emotional control, right? In a more kind of graduated way, right? That's why I say, like, the performance stress curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law describes like the escalation. And for some of you, it happens in a very sort of smooth sequential path. Others, it's like a light switch. That's more a consequence of accumulated emotion, which I'll get to later. Okay, but brain stuff, right? This section right here of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. And that last brain function that I mentioned, emotional control, well, guess what? It lives right here. Now, this section down here, right, that's actually a little red thing that is called the amygdala. Oh, sorry. That's actually the hippocampus. The amygdala is right here. But this whole section here is the emotional system. So what will happen is, right, the prefrontal cortex will be trying, wait, say this in a different way, right? Prefrontal cortex tries to control your emotions, right? That's what happens when you use your mind to kind of work through, like, stay calm, don't worry about it, right? Just take the next trade, be process oriented, don't worry about P&L. Like, all the things that you're saying to yourself, right, are coming from that prefrontal cortex attempting to satiate or calm your emotions, which works, right, when you're at like the higher level of the performance stress curve. But as you get farther and farther down, right, the emotional system starts to work even more, and it actually can get to the point where it can completely shut down your emotions entirely, right? So there are some of you who believe that you should always be able to control your emotions. Some even expect that it should be easy for you to be able to do that, okay? but you're not understanding the actual nature of how the brain is wired. Okay. And the part of the brain responsible for emotional control can get shut off entirely by your emotions. Right? It's just a sadistic way that the brain is designed, and we have zero control of it. Okay. And on the flip side, right, your emotions are too low, right? The prefrontal cortex is not able to help you to develop new habits, to strengthen your rules, basically to be disciplined, right? So you succumb to boredom and procrastination, laziness, all the stuff that's on that side of the curve, right? It happens because the emotions are too low. Okay. So we cannot change these patterns in the brain. Okay. We can only work within those constraints, right? And so, I've kind of alluded to this already, right? So ultimately, like what we're looking for here is, right, I want you here as often as possible. Okay. That's what I want. And the mapping of your pattern begins by trying to recognize the deviation on either of these sides. Okay. Because the farther you fall, right? Let's say you don't recognize that you've fallen until you get down here. I mean, in some respects, it's almost just math, right? Like, look how much farther you have to go to recover, right? Versus if you recognize it when it's here. Right? It's just, you don't have as far to go to recover. It's easier to recover at that point. Okay. So I know that it's tough to be unable at times to control, to gain control. But that ultimately the control is just a short-term strategy to ultimately be able to solve these entirely. And so it just becomes easier and easier for you to stay at the top of that curve. Okay. Let me just pause here and just see if there's any questions on what we talked about in this first step, because we're going to be going into a lot more. I want to make sure that things are clear. Okay. Looks like the question.
Yeah, there's a question from Rich here about how do we increase our emotions if we spent a lifetime shutting down our emotions?
It's a very good question. And I think if you've got a lot of skill, right, kind of blocking that out, the beginning of this is a bit like kind of like a slow moving, just like kind of letting yourself feel more, right? It's not going to be a light switch. Obviously, you have so much skill being able to block it out. But again, sometimes you can kind of make that switch when you start to actually understand the value of looking more closely at your emotions and the cost and the consequence of wanting to kind of shut down your emotions in the way that you have. I think you're here, right, because your attempts to shut them down have probably worked in a lot of situations, but then they don't, and they break down and they cause some significant problems. So I think just kind of that mental shift, can kind of get it started, and just know that it's going to take some time to kind of open yourself up. But the mapping process that I'm going to get into is going to help you to kind of go through that iterative process, right, where you're going to start to grab hold of data points that may not necessarily feel emotional, but they're going to be reflective and representative of the emotion. So even if you don't feel it, but it's reflected in your actions, in your thoughts, in the changes in your decision-making process, right, then you're going to know that there's emotion there, even if you don't feel it. Okay, I think I saw one about the Yerkes-Dodson law. Yeah. Can you have a string of losses yet be high in the Yerkes-Dodson law? Absolutely. Absolutely. You can be up at the top of that curve, right? Again, every trader, right, has a unique mixture of emotions that kind of gets you to that top of that curve. And, I've seen this in every competitive environment where for some, you almost need losses to motivate you to kind of be the kick in the ass to get you to like focus in the right way, to make the right decisions. You need your back up against the wall, right, in a pressure, angry sort of way to fuel you, right? But obviously there's some kind of patterning there that, has made you reliant on losses to be making good decisions. I know it sounds a little warped, but for some of you that actually is the case. So in these early stages, I am less concerned about what emotion is fueling you and more about you becoming aware of what emotions are and beginning to gain some command and control of producing that, right? Like you at your best is no more random than you at your worst, right? There's predictability all around. The difficulty is we don't know what that predictability is in the short term, and we need to figure that out. All right. I know we're kind of I'm just going to tell you right now, we're going to go long today. So we're going to kind of go past the 1 minute and 1:30 time frame that we were aiming at here. So if you've got things that you want answered, let's say, if you have to leave at 1:30 and there are questions that you want answered, just post them, before you go. I promise to get to them. But yeah, there's just a lot of material in this first webinar, and I want to make sure that we kind of get through all of it in the right way so that we're all on the same page, and then we can kind of all together be in the trenches working over the next several webinars. So keep the questions coming in. I'll get to some more of them in a bit. I just want to move on now to the next step here. Okay, so right, if emotions are signals, right, of a problem, as I mentioned, right, the second step here is getting to the root of the problem, and again, many of you see, right, the greed, the fear, the FOMO, the anger issues, right, as the problem, but that's a myth, right? Okay, emotions are signals of the problem, and they're one of many signals, and we'll get to that soon, right, in the mapping pattern here. But right, as we begin to kind of get into the details of the system, the whole premise of what we're after, right, is trying to be better at recognizing what the signals are telling you. Okay, it may be an indication of a weed that needs to get pulled out, but it also may be a signal of something else. Now, for those that have read the book, what I'm going to share with you here is new, so perk up and pay attention. Okay, so level 1, okay, emotions are what I would say are part of our sensory system. It's part of our ability to kind of feel and be in tune or be in touch with the market. And if that sensation is free of bias, free of any kind of pain or personal issues, right, then they're going to be a very strong reflection of what is happening and then help to feed your intuition. But we're looking for that kind of purity. Okay. Now, level 2 can be true for both newer traders and experienced traders, right? Where emotions can be a signal of weaknesses in your trading strategy or your knowledge, right? And in the book, I actually talk about both the newer trader and a more experienced one. The newer trader, was having a lot of hesitation at the moment of entry. And it turned out that all the questions and doubts that were kind of running through his mind needed to be answered. They were part of a discretionary trading style that just wasn't as systematic as it could be, or as systematic as it needed to be for him to be able to get into those positions without any hesitation. And once he actually did answered all those questions and kind of came to some conclusions, and the discretion became a little bit more systematic, he was trading as he wanted to, and there was no issues, right? So the fear, the doubt, the hesitation was really just a symptom of weaknesses in his knowledge about his own system. And ironically, the exact same thing was true for a trader who was a 15-year veteran, right? And so for him, it was relying on his intuition to make some very, very large bets. And for him, the gap in his knowledge was understanding sort of the differential in what and how intuition showed up so that he could recognize it as something that was worth putting a large bet on versus something that was not worth putting a large bet on. He couldn't make that distinction. And once he did, he was able to scale up and profit accordingly. Okay. So at the end of the day, right, there was nothing flawed about what either of them were experiencing. And for some of you, especially as you're newer into this game, right, your emotions can be more reflective of that, right? You can be frustrated because there's just understandings of maybe why you're losing or why the price is moving in the way that it is, how certain indicators kind of line up. I mean, there can be frustration and just a more subtle sense that there's just something that's not quite right in your comprehension. You can lose confidence for the same reason, right? You can get overconfident, right? Thinking that you've kind of figured things out, to a larger extent than you have. And it's not a deeper flaw that is like the bulk of my system, but it's very, very important that you're able to distinguish that. And I would say that for traders who are kind of, with less than 3 years of like full-time experience, right? You could be trading for 10 years, but if you've only been doing it for, 5-6 hours a day, like that doesn't really count. Right. So it's less about the time and more about the comprehension and the experience. For a lot of you, this is a level where you've got to really work hard to tease out whether or not the emotions that you're experiencing are related to this level or that they're related to this next level, which is really where, kind of the bulk of my system applies. Right. Emotions are signals of underlying flaws and biases, illusions, wishes, right? And the entire mental game of trading, right, is designed to help you figure out what those are. I promise that this webinar series will do the exact same thing. You do not need to have read the book to go through that. In fact, I'm going to give you some things that are going to make it even easier than the book would. I mean, I should hope so for what you're investing here. But let me just give you some examples of what I'm talking about, so it's clear kind of where we're at. I will be spending a lot more time on these in webinars 2 and 3, but I just want to give you an idea, right? So expecting perfection is a common one. High expectations, right? That, I think for some people think like, well, how could expecting perfection be a flaw? Well, it's great for motivation, but oftentimes it's very troublesome for fear, right? That expectation just kind of hovers over you. It can create a lot of anger when you fall short of it. It can reduce confidence when you fall short of it regularly and over time. Okay. The illusion of control, right? The trading, there's so much out of your control, and yet there's a wish or a desire that more of it could be. Expecting to make money from every trader every day. There's a lot of people that might not admit to that on the surface. Like, of course, that you can't. And yet deep down, you kind of harbor either that expectation. And so when that expectation is not met, it's met with anger. It's met with loss of confidence. It's met with fear. Hating luck kind of ties into the illusion of control, but a more specific example of this. I'm going to share with you in before webinar 2 a document that I've created that really lists out. I mean, I can't tell you how many there are, but there's maybe 40 to 50 of them, right? And just to help you become more and more precise at finding the exact flaws, illusions, biases, et cetera, that are affecting you. All right. So, we're here, right, at level 3, but emotions can also be a signal of accumulated emotion. I've referenced that term before. Effectively, what that means is, right, emotion builds up over time. It can build up in the short term, right, kind of day over day, when you're in a drawdown, or, the excitement, happiness, euphoria can build up, when you're actually making a lot of money, having your best month ever, right? That accumulated emotion can be a significant problem, right? Because it can take you from in that ideal state of mind to rapidly overwhelming your ability to, control that emotion, and of course, losses are had. But this accumulated emotion can also kind of build up over the long period of time, right? Some of you in the early stages of your career have lost some decently large sums of money. Okay. You were over leveraged. You didn't know what you were doing, and you're trying to make up for it. I mean, I can tell you the number of clients I've talked to in the last year who've kind of fit that category, where there's $60,000 to $500,000 of losses that are just hovering over them, and they just feel like, making $1 or $2K a day is just nothing. It's like not worthwhile, or even a couple $100 a day. It's so, that accumulated emotion forces them out of their system to try to turn trades into something they're not, to not take losses when they should. But then other examples of accumulated emotion would be like, if you've busted accounts multiple times in your career, if you've been trying to get through those, kind of combines and get funded multiple times and failed, or if you've missed out on large sums of money. I had a client who, sold a position for a 30% profit, 5 days later at 4x. I mean, it's rough. The client that sold Dogecoin very early in the move and missed out on millions of dollars. I mean, like life-changing money. And it aided him for months until we were able to actually see that the roots of that came down to some confidence issues that were not just a trading problem, but also a personal one too. So again, at the end of the day, you got to kind of understand what the emotions are telling you. What is the signal telling you? And if the signal is really, really intense, then it might be accumulated emotion. And, you might want to kind of call that out as you're going through your mapping process, in the next couple of weeks here. Look out for stuff like that. Okay. Now, levels 5 and 6 are mostly outside of the boundaries of what we're going to do in this webinar series, but I want you to be aware of them. If you have questions, right? I mean, I'm not going to not answer questions related to this, kind of in the Q&A section or our time here, because I want you to get the help you need. But from my end, I'm going to be more focused on levels 3 and 4, but 5 and 6 are I think important to recognize if they're there, right? So level 5 can include, just like financial stress, personal issues with your family or your spouse, and outside investment, the demands of day-to-day life, childcare issues, somebody getting sick. I mean, our personal lives, right, can very easily kind of bleed into trading, and being able to block that out and create, kind of a buffer for that is very important. And those of you who are interested in doing that, I'll be talking more about that probably in webinar 3, but I might loosely start to get into it in webinar 2, because not only is it is important to kind of dealing with this, but I think in terms of a preparatory, like your preparation, your warm up to trade, it's very important that you are actually kind of putting yourself in a bubble. And the only things that are allowed to kind of be in there are what is going to help you to make trading decisions. And of course, you can kind of come and go, through that. If, contractor comes to the house or something's happening, right, you can step out of that bubble, but you damn well better bet that you got to walk back into it and recreate it. Otherwise, it's going to be problematic. Now, the question kind of came through a bit ago around this, right? Can the system help you, affect things in your personal life? And the answer is yes. Okay. The difficulty in your personal life is that it's sometimes harder to kind of map the patterns, right? Because they're just broader. Like I love working in trading or in poker or in golf because it's just such a contained environment, and it makes it so much easier to map that stuff. Not to mention that sometimes, trading brings out issues, right, that wouldn't normally come out in your personal life, and you're reacting in some ways that you wouldn't normally. And so it becomes a lot easier to kind of map that stuff. But, you might notice perfectionism, right? Perfectionism affects you in your personal life just as it affects you in trading. So yeah, like you're going to have an opportunity to kind of work on both areas, right? In trading and outside of trading. And I think if you do that, you're going to be in a position to make a lot more progress, and kind of do a little bit of cross training in a sense. Okay. Let's keep going here. So like I said, right, the bulk of our work here is going to be on layers 3 and 4, right? And so when we look at the mapping your pattern, right, mapping your pattern feeds into helping you to find the root of your problem, right? And it does so because it provides the details that help us kind of deduce what's going on beneath the surface. Because what you see right now on the surface is not the problem, right? It's a signal or a symptom, right? It's going to help you to analyze the problem. And, maybe this slide will help you to understand what we're talking about here, right? Because at the end of the day, right, if you try to pull the weed out and you actually get it out, the root is going to keep growing back. And yeah, obviously this image is a bit dramatic in terms of the amount of roots that are going on down there. But some of you, you've got some complexity, right? More so than you realize. Others, you actually have, roots and weeds that are not that deep, but you've got a lot of different weeds that need to get pulled out. And there's complexity because you're not really sure where to start, right? Which one do you pull out first? Because I can promise you that when you start to dig down, right, into the roots of these problems, they oftentimes are interrelated, and you'll be able to kind of work on them more effectively. All right, I was going to do this later, but I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. Confidence, right? If you've got a confidence issue and you've got an anger issue and a fear issue and greed, confidence is where you start. Confidence is the foundation to your mental game, right? And all the other issues, oftentimes will feed dramatically off of that. I'll talk more about that later, but okay. So when we look at again, kind of the roots of this issue, there's a second important rule for how the brain works that is really important to understand, because again, it provides the logic behind why we're going to go through the process that I'm describing. Because ultimately what we're looking for, right, is not emotional control, right? Emotional control is a temporary short-term solution. We're looking for resolution, right? Resolution means that you've actually gotten all the roots out and the soil is clean, and you can kind of plant the stuff that you want. Okay. And your mind is a lot clearer. All right. So rule number 2 here, the mind has a limited capacity. Okay. The mind being that prefrontal cortex, right? The part of the brain where you're actually thinking, you're planning, you're making decisions actively, right? If you have the voice, the voice in your head, that's happening in the part of the mind, part of the brain that I'm talking about here. Now, this research came from AT&T back in the 1930s when they were doing research on phone numbers. Now, AT&T, for those international, it was like kind of the U.S. carrier, initially the only carrier for all phone communications in the United States. And they found, right, that people on average could hold between 5 and 9 pieces of information, right? And so the average was 7. And so that's why phone numbers minus an area code were 7 digits, because people could reliably remember that number. Okay. Now, why is this important? Because as we said before, right, emotional control is a mental function. Okay. It uses some of that space. And if you're going to devote mental resources to controlling emotions, guess what? It comes at a cost. You are giving up a part of the brain that you ideally would want to be using for making good trading decisions to control your emotions. So yes, we are going to choose that option in the short term, because if you don't, right, it's going to cost you more, right? Your mistakes are going to be worse. So we're going to make the choice in the short term to use that part of our brain. But in the long run, you don't want to have to keep using your mind in that way, because eventually, A, it's going to break, or B, at best, you are limiting your profitability. Okay, and maybe these graphics will help maybe kind of illustrate what I'm talking about here. Okay, so let's just assume that this pie chart represents the way that you think. Okay, and so these factors I realize are basic, right? Your decision making is obviously more complicated in terms of the things that you're thinking about, but let's just, for illustrative purposes, assume that these are the 7 factors that you're thinking about while you're either about to make a trade, considering a trade, or actually in it. Sorry, about to make it. But then when your emotions start to get a little bit higher, now you can see that there's a bit of a battle going on, right? So not only have you lost either some consideration or all consideration to a couple of the factors, but now they're being replaced, A, with the correction, and B, with the sort of suboptimal, I can't lose another one, right? So I can't lose another one, stay calm, right? There's the battle, right, being represented in your mind. And of course, this is what it looks like when things get really bad, right? Now, all those things are gone, and all you're thinking about are things that are completely unrelated to the actual trade that you're looking at, okay? Resolution is how you get back to that pie chart on the left, reliably, consistently, without having to fight all the time for that, okay? The triggers will keep coming, right? The triggers to your emotions will keep coming, right? You don't get proper fill. You get stopped out immediately. You have to close a big position. Whatever the triggers are to your emotions, whether it be fear, anger, or euphoria, right? In the latter, like closing a big position and feeling euphoric, the triggers will come, but you'll be able to stay in that position where your emotions are ideal, right? That is the power of my system, right? So you can get to the point where you no longer have to be battling up against these emotions, right? You actually can just have more of your mental space freed up to make the trades you want. Okay. Now, while I'm going to be talking a lot more on this step in webinar 2 and 3, you can get started right now. Okay. And it's actually very easy to do. All you have to do is ask why. Okay. So as I start going through the mapping process, as you start mapping your patterns over the next few weeks, or those of you who have already started the process, right? But ask these why questions reliably in the moment or soon thereafter, and start to line up, right? Why is it happening? And what level, is really the emotion coming from? Again, you may not get answers right away, but if you ask the question, it'll give you a chance to actually start opening your mind and being curious, because a lot of times the answers are there. I'm not saying you have kind of the full picture, but there's data and information that's not being accessed because it's just been blocked out. All right. Third step of the problem, and we're going to be taking a break here very shortly, I promise. Third step of the problem is correcting your problem. Sorry, third step of the system is correcting your problem, okay? Once you see in real time, right, thanks to the mapping process, once you understand what's causing those emotions in real time, then you're armed with a correction, right, that you can deploy against the FOMO and the greed and the impatience or whatever else is going on. But you've got to bring it in the right way, because if you don't, then you're not actually going to be able to correct it. And so, many of you succumb to this myth, right? You think that education is enough. Education of the system, a general awareness of your patterns. But there's a reason why there are overweight doctors. There's a reason why maybe it was a tell when my first trainer was a bit overweight. That's probably not the guy that I should have been going to personal training with, but it's because, right, knowledge is not always the answer, right? Why are there doctors that smoke cigarettes? I mean, right? Knowledge is helpful, right? But knowing is only half the battle here. And this is something I call the G.I. Joe flaw. For those that know G.I. Joe, it was around when I was a kid, right? Their tagline was, knowing is half the battle. Well, the other half of the battle is what comes next, right? That's what, this thing is all about, where you're learning to actually train what you know in the right way, right? And so you train your mind like you train your body, right? Training and repetition is the only way. And there are some of you who have corrections to your issues, but you're unprepared to apply them. You don't know them well enough to apply them. And under intense emotions, they break down and your knowledge sort of dissipates, right? Think of intense emotions like lifting heavier weight, right? If you're unable to use that knowledge to properly fight against, it doesn't mean that you can't. It just means that you're not strong enough at that moment to be able to do it. And so you've got to build your way up. And so how do you build your way up? You recognize the earlier signs and you begin fighting then when the emotion is lighter and you actually have the ability to lift, right? Because I can't go and bench press 200 pounds right now, right? If I tried to, I probably would hurt myself, right? I can bench press 120, no problem. Go in there and get it done. So if that's all that you can do, then you got to be really well prepared. You got to have those corrections very strongly in your mind. Otherwise, you're gonna get run over. All right. So summary of the system, right? Mapping your pattern. We're going to talk about it today and in the next webinar, probably in webinar 3.2 for anybody that still kind of has some lingering issues. But in webinar 2, we are going to go over, your patterns. I'll get to all that later. Step 2, right? Getting to the root of your problem, which we'll talk about in the next 3 webinars, as well as correcting your problem, and then repeating and adapting in webinar 5. All right. So we're going to take a break here. When we say 7 minutes, we'll split the difference between 5 and 10. Come back at, just past 1 o'clock Eastern time. And we'll get to actually the homework and what you're going to do in the next webinar. I'll start looking through some of these questions, and those that want to hang around, I'm going to run to the bathroom real quick, and we'll come back in 1 minute. I'll answer those. All right, this comes from JWT Trader. The reason I had difficulty with most expensive trading mistakes is because the reason I'm here is not because of a mistake that cost me money. My problem is that I just cannot size up to the level I want. Each time I do, I start to lose money and then revert to my normal size. I've been a full-time trader for 22 years, both as an institutional trader, as an independent one. So it's not that I don't know that I can consistently make money in theory. If I had to double the size, I should make double the money, but doesn't work that way. So why, and what can we do about it? So it's very, very likely that there is some weakness in your confidence as a result of this. It may not feel that way. Oftentimes, confidence issues can be subtle. But when we look at kind of the fear that's coming up, it seems very out of line with what you're experiencing. And so a lot of times with what happens, and I guess what I would ask for you, because this is what I've seen, is a lot of kind of high expectations and perfectionism. And the damaging effect of that is that your motivation stays high, your skill stays high, but your confidence doesn't kind of climb along with it. And so your confidence kind of flatlines. And so as you get kind of higher, as the differential between your skill set and your confidence gets bigger and bigger, it will feel even more and more unstable to take the kinds of risk, right, that you're talking about taking here, even though theoretically, right, the risk shouldn't be there, but it feels a lot greater, right, because of that differential. So I would look, as we're going to go through this mapping process, right, shortly. I would look for yourself in some of those, kind of asking why questions, like what specific things are coming up for you in your mind, and try to frame them under the heading of confidence, because it may be, where you need to be looking. All right. I'll answer a couple more questions and we'll get back going here. Jared, I'm a newer trader. For newer traders who have no baseline, how do we find our optimal state? What I would say is look for it in places outside of trading. In general, as a newer trader, a lot of your kind of emotional experience is going to come from what you experience everywhere else in your life as well. So a lot of times when I'm working with a new trader, the issues that they experience in trading are almost always mirrored in issues that they experience outside of it. That's not always the case, right? Sometimes performance issues can be somewhat more performance-based. And so what you might find is some of the issues may have occurred in the past related to a previous job, when you were in sports or in other performance environments, even academic ones. So you may have to kind of look back at things that were typical back then, and then getting into trading has kind of activated them now. Let's see the next question here. From Joe, during the course, will you address specific problems areas such as adding to a losing position? Yes, I mean, that's a very common one, right? So I think for you right now, as we begin this mapping process, ask yourself the why questions, or ask yourself the what questions, right? What is happening around the instances where you're adding to a losing position, and then you can start thinking about the why around why that occurs. For me, the difficulty to map the pattern is in describing it as greed or fear or anger. The problems often appear a bit of everything. Please comment. I will get to this very shortly. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what we call the emotion. Right? The emotion is just sort of what's occurring on the surface. We need to get to the roots of it. And so whatever you call the stuff on the surface, it is what it is. Right. And yeah, okay, a little bit of a spoiler alert. I'll say it again for everybody that isn't back from the break yet. But I really don't care about the emotions, right? The chapters in the book and the way we categorize it is just a heading that gives us clues, because things sort of aggregate in that area. It's almost like a certain type of setup, right, is going to have a particular marker to it. Well, fear has particular markers around it, right, that are different than anger. And so we get kind of different clues, right? But at the end of the day, the emotions don't really matter, as much as what is actually causing them. Okay. So I know there's a number of other questions here. Keep posting them in here. And maybe another point, but I'm going to try to kind of go through this next section here. Maybe not like a lightning speed here, but I'm not going to get to any more questions until we get a little bit closer to the homework, and then I'll stick around and answer more at the end. Okay, so we're going to get into the nitty gritty here of the mapping your pattern, right? This is kind of are going to be our primary focus for the homework for next week. I've obviously given you a couple tasks that you can do in addition to that, but this is the one that's going to be primary. Okay, so this is sort of the basic idea of what we're attempting to do, just to give you one more sort of analogy here. Okay, so you are in an optimal state, or you're in just a decent state, right? It's not even like at the top of the curve, but you're close to it and you're trading well. Okay, but then think about those instances when the emotions start to affect you, right? You start to feel the pain of some previous losses, or itchiness of a sideways market or a bad market for you, right? And your mind begins to get manipulated into jumping into a position, right? But obviously it hasn't quite completed yet. There's only 4 or 5 indicators that suggest that it's the position to get into. And so in a way, what's happened is your mind has begun to diverge, right? You've gone off of the road that you ought to be on, and you've now started going down the wrong path. And for many of you, you don't recognize that you've taken a wrong turn. Like, we've all been in that situation where we're driving, right? And you don't even realize, driving on a highway, that you've passed 5 exits. I remember instances where I drove by like 3 exits before I realized how far I'd gone. I was like stuck in my own head thinking about something. But we can drive a car, in that automatic, state of mind, and you can also be trading in an automated state and not even recognize that you've kind of fallen off track here. So the idea of the mapping your pattern is to try to erect these road signs, in a sense, in our mind, so that you can identify as fast as possible that you have diverged from an ideal state, or at least a state that's not problematic, right? But for some of you, right, you don't even realize that you've taken a wrong turn so long until you blow by a sign that says, bridge out, and you're about to drive your car off the cliff. So that's what we're trying to do here. Here's how we do it. Okay. So step 1, you're going to use a data collection worksheet, which is also in your workbook. I'll show it to you in a second. Step 2, you're going to draft a map of your greed, your fear, your anger, confidence, or discipline. And then step 3, is to actually refine that map. I'm going to explain what all of these mean now. The data collection, okay? So the idea of the data collection, first and foremost, is to look at those big trading mistakes that you make, right? You should have a list of them. And if you don't, right, continue to work on that so it's solid, right? And they might include forcing mediocre setups, hesitating on entry, exiting too early, moving a stop, not even setting one, right? Holding on to losers too long, adding to losing positions, putting on too much size, adding size, at inopportune times. And the difficulty we have, right, is that these trading mistakes do not tell us what is going on beneath the surface. We don't know what is causing them, right? Because if we look at, just a couple examples, right? So forcing a mediocre trade setup, right, could happen because you're pissed off because your previous trade got stopped out, right? So you're basically angry. You could force a mediocre trade setup because you're bored, right? Looking for action, right? You're feeling fear, right? The pressure to make money, right? Or there's greed, right? Trying to repeat a highly profitable day, or you're trying to make up for a string of losses and feeling more desperate. Variety of emotions that cause that trading mistake, and every single trading mistake really is like that. So, for example, hesitating on entries could be because of fear of not wanting to make a mistake. Could be a string of losing trades make you overthink, and it's really about lacking confidence, or you're just not able to trust your gut, and so there's a bit of fear around that. Exiting trades too early, right? You don't want to lose profit you've already made. There's anger, locking a profit to break a losing streak, low confidence, or avoid taking a loss out of fear. Okay. So again, I'm just trying. So some of you, right, you see these big mistakes, and that's kind of where your thinking stops. I want you to continue to dig beyond that and begin to look at a lot more of the data around. And the data collection worksheet is going to help you to do that. All right. And here is what we are looking at. Okay. We're looking at identifying the instrument or the situation, the triggers, right? So the what actually sparks the emotion, the thoughts that come up around it, the emotions, obviously the emotions that come up there, behaviors and actions. So behaviors and actions sometimes can be a little bit confusing, right? For me, I'm less concerned about the actual term and the language, and more specifically looking at, kind of what is actually sort of showing up there, right? So for me, like behaviors are more of like, in my mind, like physical signs, being hyper focused, your leg or your hand kind of tapping, heat in your head, tension in your chest, things like that. Whereas actions would include things like opening up a chart that you wouldn't normally, rapidly scrolling through different time frames, or even like kind of landing on like a 1 minute chart when you would never trade on such a small time frame, or just like looking for trade ideas, maybe even copy trading, right, from Twitter or a trading group, or kind of hyper focusing on P&L. Then you're also going to try to look for the changes in your decision-making process, changes in your perception of the market, and then actually detail out the specific trading mistake. Right now, I'm going to go through some examples of this so you have a clear idea of what we're talking about. But I want to first give you some more data around the big five, right? I've talked about this already a few times before, right? The big five psychological problems. This is where the bulk of our focus is going to be, right? The greed, fear, tilt, overconfidence, lacking confidence, and discipline. Okay. So I'm going to start out with discipline, which is the opposite of how I did it in the book, because discipline is something that I think many of you get wrong. Okay. And I want to make it very, very clear that for the majority of you that think you have a discipline problem, you unlikely don't have a pure discipline problem. I'm not saying that it's not there, but we have to make sure that the discipline issues that you're experiencing are not being caused by any of those other four emotions. Because if they are, then you can't actually make progress. Because at the end of the day, discipline, right, in its purest form, is a measure of how strongly connected you are to your goals, to your trading system, and to your beliefs, right? How strongly connected you are to your process, right? So you think about people who are the most disciplined, they are very, very strongly connected to ideas, to their processes, to their routines, to their convictions. And that's what makes them mentally strong. That's what makes them disciplined, right? The discipline is automatic. And so if your discipline is breaking down in any one of these ways, okay, we can look and see, all right, well, the energy is too low, right? The performance stress curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law, right? Energy is too low, sure. But a lot of you are misinterpreting violations of discipline that occur on the right side of that curve that are actually more emotional. Okay. So we need to make sure that you're teasing out those differences properly. And as you're going through the data collection, that's going to be a very, very important thing to tease out. But again, these kinds of discipline problems, are very, very common, and they can all happen because your energy is too low. And so you need to be looking for ways to boost it, whether it be physical energy, whether it be motivational, right? Getting more connected to your goals, things that we'll cover in the next few webinars. Okay. So the next one is greed. And I'm just going to be blunt because it's just better that way. If it was up to me, I would not have included this chapter in the book. The only reason this chapter is in the book is because you all use the term greed, and it's commonplace in trading to describe it. But to me, it's a term that has no meaning, that is reliable in terms of what's going to help you, right, to be better traders. Yes, it's interesting for TV, right? The fear greed index, blah, 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 right? But at the end of the day, right, your job is to make money. So going after money, which is what greed is at its core, is not a problem. The problem is that you are excessive in your attempts to do that. And so where does that excessiveness come from? Well, right, there's just nothing unique about it, right? It's all related to issues and flaws that I see in all of the other different types of issues, right? With fear and anger and overconfidence and lacking confidence, right? That's primarily what is driving the greed. Emotionally, you may experience it as greed. Cool, right? That's your label. That is your bucket with which you're labeling those actions, those behaviors, those thoughts, right? All the things that you're collecting in your data. But at the end of the day, for me, it's meaningless, except it matters to you. So we're going to keep using it because it matters to you, and that's fine. Okay. But at the end of the day, right, we're not going to focus too much on greed because your job is to make money. We're just looking for where does that greed cross that line, take you down, right? That performance stress curve, right? That Yerkes-Dodson law, where it's excessive. And so these are the common signs that you're going to start to look for, right? Focusing more on P&L or the utility of money, feeling the need to make money, dreaming about idealistic returns, wanting to make the absolute max in a trade, being blind to risk, an intense desire for more, never feeling satisfied, focusing on too many charts, chat groups, Twitter feeds, etc. Okay. But if you've noticed, right, any of these signals can be evidence of anger or fear or confidence issues. So again, you pick the bucket and I will work with it. Okay. But for me, an irrelevant topic. All right. So fear. Fear similarly kind of gets a little bit not very, very clear in the trading world. I think there's a gross kind of overestimation of the number of people that are actually struggling with fear. Right? Because at the end of the day, trading is intense. It is a highly, highly competitive environment, perhaps one of the most competitive environments in the world. So if it were not intense, then that actually might be a bad thing, right? Then you're too flat, right? We want to find that ideal mixture, right? And a lot of times that ideal mixture includes feeling the intensity of what you're doing. That is not fear, right? I'll be honest. Not the only issue, but for me, one of the reasons that I was choking was because I was misinterpreting the signals of that fear. I thought it was bad. I thought it was bad that I felt this nervous. Okay, but I just got back from the Players Championship a few weeks ago, working with a client down there who played very, very well, had a chance to win, and in the final round, after the final round, I asked him how he felt, and he said, "I felt like I was going to puke on every hole." Okay. So, and he played really well. I misinterpreted the signal of that fear. And eventually I learned, right? And I got to the point where my hands could be visibly shaking over a putt and I could still make it, right? Because I didn't believe that the fear was bad, right? So that actually is one of the underlying flaws, right? That oftentimes is evident in fear, right? Is believing that fear or anxiety is a bad thing. It's not. It can be fuel for you to perform well. We want to look for what makes it excessive. Okay. So fear also includes, in terms of terms, right, nervousness or pressure, anxiety. Fear in a big way would just be panic. Fear is a signal of uncertainty. Well, what does that mean, right? You do not have fear when you're certain. When you're 100% certain of something, you don't have fear. Now, if you should be a little uncertain, then you're probably overconfident, right? That 100% is not actually accurate. But the bottom line is, right, fear is just highlighting uncertainty. right? You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if this trade's going to pay off, right? You feel a little bit nervous about it. That's totally normal. But what becomes problematic are the underlying flaws that turn that uncertainty into something that actually compromises your mind. Like you can't handle that uncertainty for a variety of ways. The common types of fear that we're looking for is FOMO, which again can be kind of like a greed subheading. I don't think that some of you are actually fearing that you're going to miss out. Some of you hate that you're missing out. Some of you will feel bad about yourself or your trading system if you miss out. And so it's actually sometimes a bit of a misnomer. So if you're going to look for FOMO, look for it as more clear markers of actual fear and not something else. Fear of losing, mistakes, failing. Fear of success is not one that I talked about in the book because it's not as common, but I don't want any of you to think that it's not common enough, right? But in general, fear of success is more related to confidence issues and not kind of pure fear, right? So the confidence becomes kind of the driver of the experience of fear. Fear is what you see, but what's kind of lurking beneath the surface is actually confidence. Common signs of fear, okay? Constantly questioning, doubting, or second-guessing decisions, excessive worry about downside risk in a trade, blowing up or failing, staying on the sidelines, overly worried about being wrong or losing money, over-preparing for the session, but then being unable to follow through with your plan. And that's the worst, isn't it? Right? You spend so much time only to just kind of puke on yourself. And then, of course, going against your gut. All right. Anger or tilt. All right. Tilt is a term that comes from poker. I just think it's a more fun term than just saying you have an anger issue. Right? Tilt problem is kind of more fun. And so, again, kind of terms, right? So frustration, irritation, annoyance, right? All kind of the same thing, right? All in the category of anger or tilt. Annoyance or rage would be obviously a big example of it. Now, anger is reflecting, okay, at a basic level, this conflict that you have between reality and what you want reality to be, right? You're pissed off that you got stopped out by a tick, right? And so you instantly kind of jump back in. And, what's that anger reflecting? It's reflecting your anger, right? The conflict between what you expected to occur, which is, not getting stopped out, and making money and what actually happens, right? So that conflict is what produces the anger. And so in general, right, if you start to think about, right, anger and those why questions, like, what are you fighting? Why are you fighting? You might start to get some answers that can be helpful. Common types of anger: hating to lose. This is like the competitive people that hate it. And at the end of the day, like, you're never going to love losing. I would never ask you to love it, right? It's not that that's not the point, right? But if the anger from losing is causing you to fall down that Yerkes-Dodson curve, right? Well, then that's a problem, right? And it's excessive. And we could look at what's causing that excessiveness. Injustice tilt would be the unfairness of the game, right? Like feeling like you don't deserve to lose. Mistake tilt should be obvious. And then, of course, revenge trading, which in my experience is like a combination of confidence issues with anger, right? So one of these other three, right, kind of come together and produce this revenge trading. Common signs of tilt: internal self-criticism, swearing or bemoaning what an idiot you are, slamming your desk after not getting proper fill, and of course the stock takes off, instantly jumping back in after getting stopped out, aggressively looking for opportunities to make your money back, being blind to risk without thinking. Okay, confidence. Oh, and I should say, I'm sorry. In your packet, there's another list of a lot of symptoms. I spent time going through the book, going through, kind of my memory bank and client work, and just put together a lot of signs that are related to greed and to fear and to anger and confidence issues and discipline issues, right? And so what you're getting from me right now is just like a small sampling. But in the worksheet that's been handed out to you, you've got a list of a lot of them. And I do not intend for that to be overwhelming. I intend for it to be helpful. Okay, so if it feels overwhelming at the time, right, you just got to kind of land on one that you want to begin mapping and getting a better sense of. Okay? All right, so confidence. Confidence is very often confused, okay, because confidence is overestimated in its priority in kind of the Western world. Like, you kind of need to have confidence in order to be successful, which is completely wrong, right? I mean, I answered a question earlier from a trader who's not as confident as he ought to be in making big moves. And yet his confidence is probably lower than some newer traders' confidence. And yet the skill is not even close. Okay. So confidence is just about your perception. Okay. It's just about the perception that you have of your skill. And if you overestimate it, you're overconfident. And if you underestimate it, you're underconfident. And at the end of the day, right, you're never going to have a perfect reflection, right, of what your skill is. Okay. But we're looking to bring in that convergence so that it's very, very tight. Okay. And when that occurs, right, sometimes, drops in confidence can be legitimate, right? Like that level 2, like legitimate weaknesses in your strategy can be related to, a drop in confidence, but not actually something that's flawed, right? And so some traders will experience just overconfidence. Some traders will just experience a lack of confidence, and then others will kind of go through this cycle based on the results. Sometimes P&L, right, is going to kind of define your confidence, which is really problematic. One of the flaws, right, is being overly results oriented and having that results orientation being how you define yourself as a trader, right? That is very problematic because now your ability to kind of tolerate those ups and downs in a way that keeps you trading well is significantly compromised, right? And so we'll talk in future webinars on how you can kind of break that. But as far as right now, we're just kind of trying to map the patterns, map the problems that you're experiencing. So common signs of overconfidence, excessive conviction about what will happen in the future, euphoria around recent wins, less disciplined with your routine, less aware or caring of mistakes, and inability to admit when you're wrong. Common signs of lacking confidence, being pessimistic, thinking you're not a good trader, you're not going to make it, you're not going to no longer have what it takes, constantly looking for the trade, adjustment, or system that will be the answer, maybe the indicator, right? The answer to get you back on track. Being overly focused on negatives, losses, bad market conditions in an unproductive way, lacking energy, and thinking slowly. Okay, so now let's actually get into the data collection process, right? Again, so around each of your most common or costly mistakes, you're going to be trying to write out all of these things. Okay, so let's go through an example. Okay, so number one, being down money on the day would be the trigger. So what happens, right? The thought is I get hyper-focused on reaching my daily goals. The emotion, revenge, right? I'm angry that I'm even in this spot. Breathing heavier is the behavior. Action is quickly moving from one chart to the next. Change in decision-making, heavily glued to P&L, not thinking objectively about risk. Change in market perception, convincing myself that it has to work this time, as if somehow you know that that's going to happen. And of course, the mistakes are sizing too large, taking trades without proper risk management. All right, here's another one. Trigger is closing out a big winner after a string of winning days. The thought is I finally cracked the code, right? And so there's euphoria and good feelings, right? Obviously some overconfidence here. The behavior is looking for opportunities rather than letting them come to me. And this person didn't identify another action, which is fine, right? You don't have to have every single one of these things included here. The idea is that over time, you're going to try to find more and more of them that are happening around it. Change in market perception, or change in decision-making, thinking about all the good things that could happen. Change in market perception, see opportunity at bad levels. And the mistake is trading larger and less likely to take profit. Now, in the data collection worksheet that you have in the workbooks that's been provided to you, you can see that the cells, like the space is actually quite small. I do not want you to think that you are constrained to that level. You can get more detailed. Okay. And here's an example of that. Okay. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these points because I want to kind of keep us moving here. The trigger is I'm eager to trade and do something. And you can see that there's a lot of emotions and thoughts that have been recognized here, right? So there's eagerness and anxiousness. Once in the trade, emotions go from instant satisfaction. Okay. Right. The eagerness to do something feels justified. And then there's satisfaction for that. But then there's anxiousness and fear all the way up until I close the trade, right? When I avoid taking a trade once or twice, the feeling to take the trade is overwhelming, right? The feeling to do something is overwhelming. So what are the thoughts that are coming up around this cocktail of stuff here? I can't make money if I'm not in trades. This is boring. Man, this could be a huge trade, although I'm outside my parameters. Then I'll think, wow, it's worth a shot and get into the trade. Once there is a constant, once in, right, there's a constant battle in my head. Should I stay in or get out? Will it run? Is it going to reverse against me? All of this stuff is gold, right? This is the stuff that you want to be capturing, right? And yeah, in the short term, it may be overwhelming. In the short term, you may not have much at all, okay? It doesn't matter what your starting point is. Just make sure that you're capturing it. And here's the cool thing, okay, right? In the correcting your problem stage, you're going to learn that one of the ways that you can actually make improvement is by disrupting this pattern, okay? By taking notes in real time, you can actually change the course of these patterns, right? You can start to actually make improvement, not by doing anything different other than writing down what has happened, right? In your mind, in your emotions, in your actions, in your behaviors, in your changes, in your thoughts, okay? By writing that stuff down, you capture the data, right? And right now, it's hard for you to know, like, what is the real gold, okay? But just assume all of it is for right now. And then over time, you're going to start to see the patterns emerge. There's going to be consistencies in the way that you're thinking, right? And that is going to be really, really important to actually creating a very good map. And all of this data is helpful, right? Because it's all on the surface, right? And helping us to deduce what is going on beneath the surface. Okay, so now the next step, right, is taking all of that data. So basically, in terms of actual practical steps, for the next week, right, if you've never done this before, if you have done this before, I'd say even still take another few days, right, and just go through the mapping your pattern process, or sorry, the data collection process. But then what you're going to do is take that data, right, let's say maybe next Wednesday, and start to put it into some order of severity. And I'm going to show you what that means right now. This is what I want you to create, okay? And this is what I call a map, right? Now you've gone from data collection to actually mapping your pattern in a very pragmatic way that matches that performance stress curve, that Yerkes-Dodson law, right? Where level 1 would be that first deviation from that kind of peak level or that ideal level of emotion. And so I gave you this example here because you can see how much is incomplete. Okay. And so for many of you early on, right, this is what it's going to look like, right? When you start to take that data and put it in, it's like, I'm not actually really seeing those early signs. In fact, I'm not seeing signs of the problem until afterwards, right? Level 7. So in general, like level 5 is where clients typically start to see like a real significant mistakes start to occur, or they're kind of compromising in the way they're thinking, right? So this person was only able to recognize level 7, right? So at this point, I know what I'm doing is wrong, and I continue doing it anyway, right? Feeling like I need to get back the loss at least. I don't know how I could have been wrong here. This makes no sense, right? And so when they have those thoughts, right, their job at that point is to try to do something different. But early on, that's going to be difficult. Okay, so this is just to kind of give you an idea of what you can be kind of scaling here, right? And so level 9 now, right? More intense level of anger, thinking, wow, man, you really are an idiot. And there's tunnel vision when it comes to making money back and making up for a mistake. So what you can see here on the left side, right? All of this is where we kind of put the thoughts, the emotions, the actions, the behaviors. And then on the technical side, right? We're just trying to segment it out by looking at the specific changes in your decision-making, your perception of the market, your opportunities, current positions, et cetera, right, at each level of anger. And the reason I've done this is because as we start to get deeper into the correcting strategy here, it just becomes a bit easier to try to change your decision-making process as well as change your emotional state, right? So having them separate makes it a little bit easier to do that. Now, this is going to be your draft. Like, this is your kind of first attempt at it. And it might look like this. Try to get at least 3 points, right? At least 3 data points. If you can't get any more than that, that's fine. Again, it's just a starting point. And then use this, right, as part of your preparation for the next trading day, right? And then maybe add to it, look for it, right? If you know what your triggers are for your anger, right, then start to look around those instances when it occurs. Now, one thing that is oftentimes helpful, right? Because for some of you, you just sort of get so consumed by the market, right? You don't even realize that there are problems, right, until afterwards, until you've made mistakes, so you're down a lot of money, or even, kind of it's far too long. You might try setting an alarm to go off every 15 minutes, half hour, whatever it is, and just take notes and kind of just take a step back and observe kind of what's going on around that. For those of you that are scalpers, high amount of trades in short periods of time, you might only take down a couple notes, and then when you have more opportunity, you can write down and expand on them more. But if you are, trading on a smaller time frame or a larger time frame and taking fewer trades per day or even week, then you have plenty of time to do this work, right? And be very, very precise and accurate in real time. But if not, right, you always can do it afterwards. And what we're looking to do is create a cycle, right? Review what you have initially, right? Review all your data collection, review your initial map before you trade, take more notes while you trade, and then afterwards consolidate it and see how much more you can add in an accurate way. And this client did that. And 2 weeks later, this is what they ended up with. Let me just make sure you can see all this. Okay. I'm not going to go through all these details, right? You can always pause the video right now and read through them if you want to see how precise they've got. But what you can see here is so much clarity around the very early signs. And what does that allow them to do? Right? They can recognize that they've taken a wrong turn very quickly and try to get back on track. And at a minimum, right? They may not necessarily always be able to stop a lot of this stuff from happening. But the cool thing about trading is compared with other competitive environments, you can stop. You do not need to continue. You can take a 5, 10, 15-minute break to get your, mentality back on track if you have the signals that you actually need to do that, right? And so those would be some. Let me just read this first one just so you can kind of see what we're talking about here. So at level 1, I don't have a very good idea of what's about to happen. It's just not clear to me. Begin to worry that because it's unclear, I'm going to take a stupid trade just to take one and not miss out. Okay. So it's a very, very subtle sign that was not obvious early on. And I think that's an important point here too, right? Some of you, again, are making the assumption that you have all the information in your mind. Cool. Put it down and prove it, right? But the vast majority of you may think that you do, but as you go through this process, you are going to dig out more and more examples. All right. So that was an example of anger, right? Same thing here with fear, right? Again, trying to create as many of these as possible. Another one for greed. Again, right? There's some big holes here, and that's totally fine, right? We're looking for 3 at a minimum, and then try to add in as many more as you possibly can. I'm going to just going to land here on confidence, just to show you that both with confidence and with discipline, you can kind of formulate it this way. For some that go through cycles of confidence, where your confidence can kind of get too low and also too high. 5 we would call ideal confidence. And so then going from 4 to 1 would be a sort of descending of your confidence. So like 4 would be slightly less confidence than ideal. 1 would be a loss of a lot of confidence. And then level 6 would be just slightly overconfident. And then level 10 would be that euphoric, significant overconfidence. But right, if you're not somebody that goes through those cycles and you're somebody that, maybe only has overconfidence, then or lacking confidence, you start with 10 as being your ideal, because that would be, sometimes higher is better. And then 1 would be your lowest level of confidence. If you experience just overconfidence, you can do this as well, right? Or I think sometimes it's better to flip it, right? So your highest level of confidence is not ideal, right? It's 10. So 1 would be your ideal level of confidence. And then overconfident would be number 10. Okay. So I'm going to pause in a minute for some questions on all this. But I want to just finish up the presentation here, and then I'll get to your questions. All right. So let's just do a quick recap, okay, of what the system is, what the homework is, and what you're going to be doing. Okay. So step number 1, right, mapping your pattern. Right, this is the primary thing that you're going to be doing in the next 2 weeks. Okay, and what I want is for you to send me your data collection worksheets, send me your drafts of your or your refinements of your maps of greed, fear, anger, or confidence, right? And to do so by next Wednesday. You can send them in earlier for sure. I'm not going to get to them, right? But you can send them in earlier. We may accept a few late ones, late stragglers. I want to give you plenty of time to do this, but obviously the closer we get to the next webinar, it's going to be harder for me to include, ones that I haven't reviewed. Okay. And I'm going to be taking your maps. I'm going to be reviewing some of them in the next webinar, but I'm going to be reviewing the ones that I think will be most reflective of the kinds of questions and issues that you all are struggling with, and trying to provide the kind of feedback that will be helpful both for that person and for everybody else to create their map. Because at the end of the day, our first priority is to make this thing as tight and as strong as possible. And if you do that well, everything else gets easier. Okay. And I know for some of you, this is going to be hard, right? It's the first time you've ever done it, right? It's hard for you to kind of attach and identify this data, and that's okay, right? Do whatever you can. Your starting point is what it is. Okay. So with this mapping your pattern process, right? The rule is your mind malfunctions when our emotions are too intense. Okay. That is what happens, and we cannot control this, but the mapping your pattern is how you can begin to take control of your emotions, but you can't always do that because the emotions are too powerful at certain times. Okay, so these are the tasks, like I said. Now, step 2, getting to the root of your problem. Right, the rule here is that the mind has a limited capacity, right, and that limited capacity shrinks the more emotion is present, right, and we want to remove some of the corrections that are occurring in real time, in the long term, right. In the short term, yeah, battle your emotions, right. You need to do that, but in the long run, we want to get rid of them. And so your task here is, as you're mapping your pattern, as you're collecting this data, you can be asking those why questions and trying to run it through that list of 6 different levels of emotion and see what emotions are causing the problems. But again, the emotions are not the problems, right? They are a symptom or a signal of the underlying problem. Okay, step 3, which we're going to do a lot more of in the next 2 webinars, is solving your problem. Again, some of you are going to be able to make some immediate progress. You're going to see things in real time you hadn't seen before. You're going to understand what you can do to correct it. But it can be a little bit dangerous here if you start to believe in this sort of placebo effect where you're making progress and thinking that you're kind of farther along than you actually are. Right? It's just premature. Right? We need to make sure at the end of the day that the corrections that you're coming up with are actually correcting the underlying flaw, correcting the real problem. Because if they're not, then they're just a form of control, and that control over time will break down. Okay, so again, you got to train your mind like you train your body, and you can train some of the logic you already have and do that and make progress tomorrow or Monday. Because education is not all you need. All right, so maybe just in the chat, just kind of talk about maybe your biggest takeaway from today. Right? Was it the Yerkes-Dodson law, which I certainly mentioned enough? Using emotions as data, maybe some idea that's a bit different from many of you. This idea of data collection or mapping your emotions, and I'm kind of curious to see what's been most helpful for you. And I think, Richard, you're going to kind of let us know kind of where to actually go through and submit the homework and get everybody cleaned up for what's being asked of them.
Absolutely. And first of all, Jared, thank you. That was fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people had some amazing takeaways here. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Awesome. So first of all, as you guys are talking about your biggest takeaways, we really encourage you to tweet it out and just kind of let us know on Twitter as well. So I'm placing a link in the chat, which should basically bring you right to this prompt, and you can go ahead and use that to just complete this and talk about the Yerkes-Dodson law, whatever your biggest takeaway was, and share that with us and tag us there as well. To go ahead and submit the homework, what you want to do is navigate first to trainerline.com. And you can also navigate, of course, directly to the university site. But if you're just here at trainerline.com, you want to go ahead and click your dashboard after logging in. And this should go ahead and bring you up to this choice. And you want to go to the university site and load that up. Once you're here, this is kind of the main dashboard where you've got access to your forums. Your courses will be here. Any courses you have will be located here. And also, if you want to keep up to date on current discussions going on in the forums, this will be located down here as well. And we'll show the forums off in just a second. But to go ahead and get to that homework submission button, you want to go ahead either to courses and click Training Psychology Masterclass, or you can click it right here.
And I want to clarify, because we got a question here. The homework is due Wednesday the 20th, not Wednesday the 13th. Good clarification. I want to give you like a solid 10 days to be able to kind of work in this, not just a handful of time. I want, again, some good stuff. But, as we get closer to the webinar, two on the 23rd, then, it's going to be harder for me to review them. But, get them done as soon as you can, but put the work in and we'll see what we got.
Absolutely. And for anything related to webinar 1, there are also a bunch of questions in the chat about where do I find the workbook, the task booklet, the reference doc. Everything related to webinar 1, event 1 is in this module right here. So let's go ahead and actually go to that event. And you can see this is where you'll get all your material, the study package, the booklet, all of that. This is where the replay of today's webinar will be located. Right now, this is where you picked up either the slides or just click this button to access the Zoom link. So once again, I saw a few questions about where to get the slides. This is one way. We also send it out by email, which we'll do for every single webinar. So once that's done and you've completed your homework, you want to go over to homework 1 submission. And this is where you'll go ahead, fill out this quick form, and upload all your data collection worksheets and submit your maps for all the different emotions, discipline through confidence. And very easy, just go ahead and submit the form by clicking this button, and we'll get sent right to us right away. And like Jared said, definitely get this in as soon as possible. And I do want to reemphasize that this homework is extremely important. It's really a key part of this whole workshop, this whole webinar series. Without it, we can't help you to the fullest extent we can. And Jared, next webinar, will be going through extensively, guiding you through this process, giving you pointers, and also reviewing a bunch of these maps and data collection worksheets live, giving you guys feedback and tips to improve. So with that, I just want to reemphasize the homework is extremely important. Get it done. And let's go ahead and talk about the forms, Jared, I think, as well, because you wanted to touch on that.
So, but I want to answer a quick question about the homework. So some are asking about, can the homework be handwritten? No, because we can't get it, right? So you can handwrite it and then take a picture of it, scan it, or take a picture and upload it. But either way, I think, we do understand that the PDF, right, doesn't allow for you to kind of type your answers in there. So, most often you can either print it and handwrite it, or print it and type it. You can create an entirely sort of separate, you could just create like a Word doc or an Excel. It doesn't need, I don't need you to send me back, your data collection or your maps in the exact form that we've, provided for you. They can be in whatever form that makes sense for you. And, maybe actually, Richard, we can make some of the other, if we can make available like Word docs, make it easier for them. We can kind of look into that.
I was actually just talking with Nick, and we're going to get Word docs sent out because a lot of people ask for that, and we'll send those out. So whatever format you want to submit it, just go ahead and upload that using these prompts right here.
Perfect. And as far as the forums go, Richard, if you can kind of navigate over to the forum. So this is another feature of this entire course. Okay, is some of you are looking for interaction, right? You've been acting or just kind of in a bit of a silo, right? Working on your own. Well, now you have, 300 plus traders who are all in the same boat, working on the same stuff at the same time, have prioritized their mental game, are willing to put their time and effort and money behind it. So here's an opportunity for you to kind of, find some discussions. There's going to be some prompts that Richard's going to kind of start you with. What I will say is that I'm not going to be in here interacting. I will come in and kind of look at some themes and see what's coming up, see what sticky points are, and it will help to, again, kind of guide what we do in future webinars. But even if that were not to occur, I think this is a great place for many of you just to kind of come and maybe meet some other people who are like-minded and trying to do the exact same work. And, I've personally experienced this myself. I've seen it with clients, right? When you are helping others, you are helping yourself too, right? So even if it's just trying to explain ideas that well, guess what? That knowledge gets stronger in your mind because, like I said at the beginning, right? If you can't explain something to your grandmother, you don't really understand it yet. And so if you can explain it to somebody else who's struggling through issues yourself, well, guess what? That's going to help you help yourself, and it's going to help somebody else, which, maybe can feel good too.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Jared said, I'll be creating different threads. Like just right after this is done, I'll start a webinar 1 feedback, webinar 1 key takeaways thread. So you can kind of give us ideas about what really stuck out to you. And all you want to do to create a new thread or respond to a new one is either click one of these existing threads, or you can go ahead and create a whole new discussion and just make a post. You can also upload a homework if you want some feedback, talk about a certain topic. And also, I highly encourage you, if you want to meet other like-minded traders, like Jared was saying, Mark stuck his nose out here and started an introductions thread. So go ahead and say hello, introduce yourself, what's your background, and that's a great way to meet other like-minded people. And if you missed how I got to this, just starting from the dashboard, there's a few ways. Let's wait for that to load. You can either just click the forums button right here, and that will bring you up to the forums, or on the left-hand side on this bar, you can click forums. Either way, they'll bring you over to this page right here. And then depending on if you're in a few different courses, there'll be different options, and you'll see some trending topics here. But if you're just in the masterclass, in the training psychology masterclass, click this, and that should bring you right back to this point right here. So let me go ahead and click one just to show you how to reply, because it might be not super straightforward. Once you see a post that you want to respond to, add a comment, you can go ahead and just click reply. And like when you're actually posting, just type out your reply, hit post, and there you go. And you can also subscribe to a different theme or thread rather, if you really want to stay up to date. And you should be able to see any replies you have up in this notification tab. So that's a brief run through. Jared, anything else that you think we should run through about the course or anything like that?
No, I think just to reiterate, right, that we're going to give you some documents on how to actually do the homework, and the homework is going to be prioritized. I want you to prioritize doing the work for it. Like really, again, think about it as an iterative process. You've got till April 20th, which is plenty of time, right? You can just look at trades from this past week, right, and begin to think more in detail about what occurred. I know some of you have kind of gone through this process already, but again, I would strongly advise, right, that you take another look at it. You've got the list of signs that I've provided in the worksheet, right, might give you some ideas of things that you may not have thought about. And certainly within the forum, right, if you want to begin kind of sharing with each other what you're finding, I think one of the things that's going to be most impactful as we kind of get farther into this is that when you start to see what other people are experiencing, it's going to help you to kind of map for yourself. And early on, it may be difficult because some things are going to feel like they apply to you, but then you're going to see the themes that are going to kind of occur the most frequently. And that's really what you're after. So again, April 20th is where we're hoping for in terms of deadline. Try to get it done by then. That'll give me plenty of time to prepare. But if they come in a couple of days late, I'll do my best to review them and prioritize what comes through.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some really cool ideas pop up in the chat, so definitely read through that. And once again, I want to really emphasize, if you've got a really important takeaway from today's video, I'll post this link once again in the chat. And Twitter is another great place to interact with other students of the class. If you see somebody posting about the Trading Psychology Masterclass, give them a follow, interact with them. And yeah, it's a great place to meet people and also learn. And Jared and I will also be looking through these posts, responding to them. Yeah, it's very cool to see what you guys got the most value out of from this webinar. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop my sharing. So definitely go ahead and do that, and we'll open up the Q&A. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right, perfect. Well, I'm gonna try to get to as many questions as I can. So obviously, if those of you need to go, you can go. And I thank you all for being here today. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time. If you want to stick around and hear some of the answers, and yeah, I'll try to get through as many of these as I can. So a couple questions about the homework. I'm going to try to prioritize that. Do we do a worksheet for each trade we take? So yeah, I mean, conceivably, if you're not taking that many trades, right, you could collect data around each one. Now, the thing is, you really want to be prioritizing like mistakes. And so early on, if you're not able to distinguish a mistake and a loss, then yeah, maybe you actually do need to do it for more frequently, because there may be actual trades that you make money on, right, that you win, and you're actually making mistakes. So I think it's sort of a bit of your own discretion as to how much you want to do. In my opinion, more is always better early, because you give yourself an opportunity to kind of filter things out. If it's not even there, right, you don't even have the ability to take it. But I would say focus more on the mistakes first and foremost, and looking for, doing data collection around that, or any divergence when you're kind of away from that optimal state. Okay. So the next question was, how about if a trader actually records himself trading and going through the emotions live, and then as a group study the video? So I wouldn't say as a group, that's a great idea. At least not for our purposes. That's going to be, I think, far too slow for what's going on. But for you individually, and I do have clients that do that, like recording themselves is sometimes easier, right? Like kind of handwriting is a bit tougher. But yeah, I have clients that will do just audio, or sometimes they'll do video. Sometimes they'll do screen capture. Sometimes they'll take screenshots of a particular trade and then go through and then like kind of write out their emotions. I have clients that who will do a screenshot of the trade at the moment of execution. Then they'll actually close down the chart, and then go to another desk and then try to write out what's going on. Like sometimes, your emotions can be, influenced if all of a sudden you sort of see price, kind of moving in one direction or the other. So it was like, all right, well, there's a lot of nervousness kind of early on. And then you get in and immediately kind of price jumps up, and all that nervousness is gone, and you kind of lose that kind of real-time data. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ways of capturing it and tools that can help you to do that. I see somebody mentioning, OBS Studio, which is a great tool as well. And I'm sure there are many others, and, great forum topic, right? Things you guys could share. in terms of something that can be helpful there. Okay, so I'm going to look through some of the most upvoted questions. Certainly now, as you all that are still here want to prioritize questions that you want. You can kind of go in there and give some upvotes. Some of these are a little bit out of order in terms of timing of the presentation. So I may go back and do a screen share if there's some sections that we want to prioritize. So Ron is asking, is this the part where you define as intuition? I'm assuming that was discussed around kind of the top of the performance stress curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law. And yes, like that is where you're generally going to have access to intuition, but having the right level of emotion is not necessarily going to give you, correct intuition, right? If you're not a good enough trader yet, right, that intuition is not necessarily going to be the most accurate. And so it really kind of comes down to the extent to which your skills, right, your skill set is able to kind of properly perceive that intuition. But yeah, intuition is, to me, defined as being able to have a sense of what is right without being able to kind of clearly articulate it in a conscious way at that moment. You may be able to soon after, but in the moment, you don't have kind of full logic or rationale. That is what intuition is. Okay. Raul says, or is asking, how do we overcome the conflict in emotions? There are times when I know I am wrong, but I don't want to admit it. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a conflict in emotions, right? This is more of an underlying conflict. And I think if we're going to start problem solving and getting to the root of your problem, you would want to try to ask yourself the question, why do I not want to admit it? And there are some flaws, that will be present in there. You don't want to admit it because being wrong would hurt your confidence. You don't want to admit it because you have confirmation bias, right? And you sort of have this deep need to be right. But clearly, right, if you're going to be able to be wrong, and then being wrong is probably stopping you from closing positions when they should be closed, because losing would be another way of being wrong. Being wrong would maybe keep you on the sidelines, out of some fear, right? But the being wrong, knowing that you're wrong is not the problem. It's that you're failing to kind of properly admit it, right? And so if we're going to break down that battle, we got to work on the not wanting to admit it side of it, and doing some more analysis there. All right. Karen or Karan is asking, when you say confidence is where you start, can we fake it till we make it? Yeah, it can, but it's not going to last for very long. Ultimately, right, confidence is just about the perception of your skill. So, why would you want to necessarily fake it, right? I think if you're lacking confidence, is it because you're lacking skill? And if you are, then faking it is actually dangerous. If you're lacking confidence because there's a misperception of your skill that is significant enough, well, then yeah, faking it could be helpful and just kind of, but sometimes people will kind of jump too far in the other direction, right? And you can become overly aggressive, and it's not really what we're after, right? And I think we're looking to try to solve the root of this, right? Understand the flaws that are actually contributing to your lack of confidence, and do that way. So again, as you're doing the mapping and getting more into detail of your confidence, those ideas will start to emerge. And if not, we're going to be doing more problem solving in the next two webinars. All right, Mike is asking, I like that many women are on this list. I find that women traders I've personally met are head and shoulders better than the men I know, definitely better at risk management. Do you find that in your institutional work, or is it just in my experience? It's a mixed bag. In my experience, it's not about gender, really. There are tendencies in people, right? Some people tend to be more risk averse. Some people tend to be, have lower confidence and better at risk management than others. But I don't see this as necessarily a strongly gendered thing. I could make gross assumptions, but in my experience, that just really hasn't been the case. The worksheets, are these for every day from today or from any significant days in the past? Yeah, it's both. There's data in the past that you just haven't used very well, right? There's puzzle pieces that you've accumulated that are just being held somewhere. And we want to kind of bring them onto the table so you can look at it and try to put them together. The old adage of kind of blowing off steam after a bad day, right? Where all you want to do is just get away and let that stuff go. But what happens, right? All that data gets lost, and then the cycle just repeats, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point in the near future, because you're not actually doing anything different. You're not able to utilize what you've learned. You've just, gone for a workout, had a couple drinks, and that's it. All right. Now it looks like these are in sequence and time, so maybe a few overlapped here. Is being at the top of the curve a short-term thing, day-to-day basis, or more of where you are at in your career? No, it's more of a short-term thing, right? At any moment in time, we can measure where you are in that curve, right? And so, yes, we could kind of aggregate those data points over a large sample and say, on average, let's just say hypothetically, like 50 was optimal. That on average, you were somewhere between 42 and 47 for 90% of your trading days, and that would be quite remarkable, actually. Or at other points, right? But I think in general, we're looking at it as a divergence in the moment. And when that divergence occurs, that's an indication that you need to start to identify the data that's occurring then, so you can map the pattern and be able to gain control of what's occurring. Could understanding dopamine cycles help understand that you would need a bigger win or a bigger loss to snap you out? So, the neurological side of this is something that could be impactful for you individually. I tend to think more of the sort of psychological factors that influence the chemistry in your brain rather than the chemistry in and of itself, right? There's a causality that is oftentimes not kind of fully appreciated, right? Because dopamine can be influenced by your perception. And so, of course, that's not always true, right? There are some people for whom, there are chemical imbalances that need to be addressed. But that's not necessarily my focus. Another way to look at the diagram is that in general, and most of the time, the starting point is somewhere away from the optimal point. So how to reach that optimal point? Well, that's a whole different conversation, right? How do you actually get into that optimal state more often? Well, number one, you got to identify what it is, right? When it happens, what are the factors that tend to contribute to it? And, you can, over time, right, map the patterns, right? Map the causality for what helps to get you in that optimal state more often. And I really do strongly advise that you all do that, right? Because sometimes you are overly emotional in the trading day because you're not well prepared. You haven't gotten great sleep. You haven't exercised. And, there's just other sort of secondary factors that maybe expose the extent of the emotionality that you experience in the trading day. And so it's not to say that that's always going to be the cure for the anger or the fear or whatever issues are emerging. But if you don't do that, well, then you've escalated that level of emotion to such a degree that it's causing bigger problems than is sort of reflective of the actual flaws that are producing the anger. So maybe 50% of the answer is, better routine, better preparation, better sleep, better energy, clearer mind when you start. And then 50% of the answer is like kind of getting to the root of the issue. Whereas right now it feels like 100% of it needs to be, the underlying flaw. But if you understand how to prepare yourself better, be a better athlete in a sense as a trader, then yeah, you actually could take care of a chunk of the emotional issues you're experiencing. Okay. I'm not sure if I understand this fully or optimal performance. How can I increase the stress? I think for right now, that's a little kind of beyond the scope of the presentation. But I think for yourself, you can just be asking that question. And there's a lot of resources that are out there. I can plug the mental game of poker too, if you want to really get into it. I talk about it there. But, really, I think what we're looking at is energy is always the primary factor. Motivation, your connection to your goals is another one. Emotion, is obviously impairing, can be impairing for that. Your perception of the challenge, right? Sometimes, it feels like it's an easy day. There's not a lot happening. And so then that kind of gives you license to not try as hard. So sometimes just your perception of what's going on is problematic too. Okay. Do you have a glossary on how to fill in the worksheets? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by glossary, but if you're looking for like kind of more instructions, I see the kind of follow-up question here, right? The words seem to overlap a lot for me. It would be great to have some general framework of what they mean. So I did kind of go through this in the middle part of the presentation. But again, trigger means like what actually sparks the emotion. Okay. Then you've got, right, so the trigger, the thoughts, right? So thoughts are the specific things that you're thinking about at that time, right? Phrases that you're either thinking or saying out loud. The emotions, right? What are you feeling in that moment? Are you feeling fear? Are you feeling nervousness? Behaviors, again, I think would be more of the sort of physical experience of what's going on. So, your feet are tapping, you've got kind of tension in your head. And Rich is asking, like, is boredom the trigger or the emotion? Boredom is more the trigger than the emotion's not the trigger, right? Emotion's never the trigger. Boredom can be a trigger. Right? Boredom could trigger a sense of urgency, right? Boredom could say, hey, you're a trader. I'm a trader. You must trade. And so there's the thought that comes out, right? Then the emotion is, the sense of urgency, right? And then the behavior is, opening up a chart and looking at data points that you don't normally, right? And then again, actions would be like, what are you doing that is kind of present there? And then changes in decision making, changes in market perception. Again, they may be overlapping in some of your thoughts, and so that can be a little bit tough to kind of tease out sometimes. But really, what we're looking at there is like more from a technical standpoint, right? Are you overweighting certain factors? Are you underweighting ones? Are you changing, sort of your overall like macro view? So you had, a thesis on the day that you had kind of a long bias, and then in the middle of the day, there's sort of a sharp sell-off, and all of a sudden now you are like kind of changing your thesis, but there actually are indications that there is more strength in the market that you're not really looking at. And so it's just like you're sort of kind of playing out this game, but you're just like looking for where your thought processes around that decision are clearly not optimal. And when you're in, right state of mind, you're thinking differently, right? So again, this is another reason why kind of describing what you're like at your best is important to do. And you can even write out like what your optimal decision-making process looks like, and then have that as your measuring stick so you can see in real time when it is diverging from that point. Okay. All right. When do you capture them? Every time you make a decision, after I sent a market, after I take a market loss, pre-market, post-market feelings, midday thoughts, all of the above, right? I think, again, I mentioned this before, it's sort of when is it most appropriate for you based on your trading style, based on the number of trades you're taking, when is the data there? And you can do a little bit here or there and then follow up on it, but for sure, try to create that cycle, right? Where it's, you're preparing with the information you have, bringing it into battle, and then seeing what else kind of gets, caught up around it. And then, then reviewing it and consolidating afterwards. All right. I like with this protocol because if we don't go back to the presentation, I forget about it. Having the document glossary would be really helpful. Understood. All right. Hopefully that was helpful then. All right. So Jeff is asking, how much time can an active trader typically stay in an optimal place of the Yerkes-Dodson law before our human brain can't stay? This is not about what is possible. Sorry, this is not what are kind of firm constraints. This is, I think, about what is possible, right? Roger Bannister breaks the 4-minute mile, and then all of a sudden 23 people do it within the next couple months afterwards. It's like, we don't know what the limits are of our human potential. So for me, I am very curious to see what it takes to be in that optimal state for a longer and longer periods of time. And I've had clients, right, especially the institutional ones who are, some of these guys are beasts, right? The level of intensity that they bring, the veracity that they have, the passion that they have for trading. It's not just about making money, right? They have so much love of the complexity of the markets and the desire to understand it and to find edges and opportunities. And so that passion keeps them in that optimal state for far longer than most people who are there just trying to make a quick buck and get out, right? So sometimes, it really is about kind of understanding how well conditioned you are for the environment. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be like that in order to be a successful trader. You certainly do not, right? You can trade for 2 hours and call it a day and be very successful. But do not think that there are limitations on this. And so you can look at it the sort of the mental conditioning, much like physical conditioning, right? Endurance, there are, the ultra marathoners, right? The massive endurance athletes who just train their bodies to do things that people would never have thought was possible. I find it difficult to identify the emotion till I'm a deer in the headlights, and that's common, right? So we just consider that through the early stages, and just start using that as your initial data point, and start looking back at the few minutes just prior to that, right? And if the few minutes just prior to that you were feeling pretty normal, then the odds are, right, that there's a lot of emotion that's kind of coming up around that, and probably evidence of accumulated emotion. How do you handle self-sabotage as a result of fear of success? Well, self-sabotage is kind of a BS term, in my opinion. Self-sabotage implies a level of control, right? That you are doing something to yourself that is not what is happening. Okay, right? The fear of success is more about a confidence issue, and there's some misperceptions, right? There's some flaws in that weakness and confidence. That is the thing that is tripping you up. So you are not sabotaging yourself. There are things that are kind of acting against you that are internal, and you've got to identify what those are. And that's how you're going to be able to get to it. But self-sabotage, in my opinion, is just a term that sounds good in theory, but it sort of actually is overconfident, because you think that you're in control when you're not. Shiva is asking if we prepare ourselves well before the trading start for the day, recognizing all the levels of emotions. Yes, I think if you are able to prepare yourself well, then you're going to be able to have a better recognition of the levels of emotion that you're having, for sure. I mean, I think if you prepare for anything, you're just going to be more likely to be successful. Do you think it's absolutely vital to create maps for each individual emotion? Great question. Or do you think creating a more general map which combines emotions can also work? Absolutely. Okay. At the end of the day, right, this is designed to be most helpful for you. And if there is, kind of more of like a general tendency where, maybe it starts with fear, and then after, several times just like on the sidelines and you see missed opportunities, the fear turns into anger, and the anger then forces you to violate your system. And then, of course, those get stopped out, and then you bemoan what an idiot you are, and then you start to lose confidence, and then that confidence kind of starts to wane, and then by all means, like that can be kind of one cycle. What'll end up happening, though, is that we're going to kind of need to know more details of kind of each emotion that you're experiencing. So really do try to kind of map each one as well as you can, so that we can again get to the roots of what's going on, because it may be sort of complicated in that cycle. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to see this stuff in real time. And if you can't, that's the biggest problem. So whatever helps you to do that, I'm all for. I'm not a fanatic when it comes to like my way or the highway. I'm a fanatic around the rules. I'm a fanatic around the fundamental principles of how we operate this thing. But how you do it, man, there's a lot of diversity out there, and I'm all for what works. What works is ultimately what I care most about. Jared, is it possible to share those data collection example for reference? So it'll be in the recording, right? You go back and review those again. And again, those are just sort of samples. But then in the next webinar, I will be sharing data collection worksheets that people send in, and we'll be using those as examples to help you all do what you need. All right, I'm curious as to your thoughts on game theory implications for infinite versus finite games, different rules for participation, conclusions, objective, golf and poker, while heavily relying on the mental game, are still finite games where the market is an infinite game. Is this any factor in my opinion? Absolutely, right? And the biggest factor, right, is the degree of uncertainty that is at play in trading versus in those other games. So you're 100% right in being able to kind of describe those in those ways. However, it doesn't mean that the emotions or the things that you're going to experience are fundamentally different than what competitors in finite games will experience. They may be more dramatic, and I think this is oftentimes an explanation for why your emotions are so intense in trading and maybe not that way, and anywhere else. The common thing I hear is like, I'm generally very confident in my life, and yet I'm not in trading, or I never get this pissed off, anywhere else in my life, and I do in trading. Why is that? And this is one of the reasons, because trading just triggers something in a more intense way than those things. Not only because you may care about it more, but because the degree of uncertainty is orders of magnitude greater than most other things in life. Okay. Captain Axelrod, very explosive start. How do you suggest we digest this info? A lot to take in, even as your reader. Well, I hope, because this was posted an hour ago, that you've gotten some answers. But if you're still here and you want a follow-up question on that, by all means, I will. I guess a follow-up to your question, to that question: how do you handle multifaceted problems if the issue is greed, FOMO, tilt combined? So from a mapping perspective, I've kind of already answered that. You can certainly combine them, but you also don't have to, right? You can map them separately. And I think what you'll start to see in the next couple of webinars as we start to dig into the roots is that there will be an overlap of issues. But by and large, okay, if you have a confidence issue and you also have issues in the other 3 or 4, if we're going to put in discipline, focus on the confidence from an asking why question most. That's oftentimes what will kind of link into, what's going to cause the fear, the anger issues, the greed, or, the discipline problems. Confidence is kind of like the foundation. Everything else sort of sits on top of that. So I would start there, but you don't have to, right? You can. Okay. Andy's asking, let me just close these. All right, Andy's asking, I'm confused when you say experienced successful traders use their emotions. I assume you're referring to fear and greed as emotions. I thought we were supposed to try to minimize fear and greed in our trading, so it's not sure what you mean by using fear or greed in your trading. Can you give an example using emotions to be a successful trader? Yeah, I think what I said earlier was like those experienced traders, they know, right, the difference between a fear that is going to be based on a bias, right? I'm fearful that this position is going to go against me because recently I've been in a downtrend, or I've, in a drawdown, versus the fear that comes up as you start to kind of see some indications that the market is weak, or that your positions are maybe at greater risk, and that there's a sort of change that's going to occur. And that feels different, right? The fear, even though we're going to categorize it as fear, the experience of it is different, which is why the data collection is so important to distinguish what is emotions based on those biases, those flaws, versus one that is more pure and representative of that. Looks like there's a follow-up question. All right, awesome. All right, what's the best way to get over bias of a recent loss? Yesterday, for example, causing you to freeze at a time of execution when conditions are favorable for a highly profitable RR. Well, this is kind of a little bit getting into the next webinar. The idea is not to get over the bias. The idea is to understand the bias and to correct it, right? Then you're not trying to get over the recent loss. You're actually changing fundamentally how you react to it. So at least right now, your job is to first understand why you're not getting over that recent loss. What is it that's still sticking in your mind that is causing you problems? Okay. Most of my biggest losses are often seen after I have a great winning run and my account is at an all-time high. What suggestions do you have to avoid it? Understand the overconfidence that is occurring there. Very often that is present, or there's fear. Those are generally the two things that I see most often. Now, occasionally, right, there can be a lack of confidence too, right? There's a sense of instability of like, how am I going to keep this thing going? But the reality is like, that's not what you're there to do, right? And so I literally had a conversation with a client this week who was still newish, right? Like say 2 to 3 years in. And for us, the decision was when he got to this spot to take 2 days off. And yes, you'd say, all right, well, why would you do that? But for him, it was important to just give him a sense of kind of consolidation, right? To feel like the recent performance was not just about the wins, but also about the improvements that he had been making in terms of his execution, the awareness that he had gained in terms of his emotions, and the management of his strategy, and just overall like doing really well. Give him a couple of days to kind of feel that to be more normal, right? Have that confidence rise a little bit. And so that's really that's just like kind of one example of what you could do, even though it might be somewhat atypical in a purist sense of like, well, you should just never take any days off. And I'm not really a purist in that regard. But at the bottom line is, right, you really need to kind of isolate like what is going on at that point or just before it, right? So like where's the marker, right? So let's say just hypothetically, it's up 8K on the month, 5 days in, 8 days in, 9 days in, whatever it is. But like that's kind of the high water mark for you, where things start to get a little squirrely in your mind, and you might continue to win. And it's not until 15K where it's like really at this point you're struggling. But at 8K, right, that's where you really need to kind of isolate what are the warning signs that are occurring that you're diverging in your mind from that optimal state. All right. Jare, can you speak a specific example about instrument or situation? I think neither one of you showed one that had to fill. Yeah, I mean, the instrument or situation, that's like kind of the pure kind of technicals of like what are you trading? What is the situation market base that you're trading in? What are you looking for? It's more of the trading stuff that is more the trader line expertise than mine. All right, I seem to know the trigger, but they seem to be natural things like after a losing trade. Is there something else that can be done for this? Yeah, you can map everything else that's what's happening. I mean, that we're going to get to what to do about it in the next few webinars, but first you got to be able to see all the details that are occurring. Currently, it sounds like the content is somewhat abstract and not in a trading terminology. Will Jare be using more trader lingo so we can better associate it? Yeah, and if I'm not, then we've got some experts here, Richard included, who can make sure that that's the case. Clearly knowing what shall be done, but repeatedly doing the opposite so feels like an evil is controlling me. I look forward to having some ideas on the solution after the webinar. Yeah. So again, try to extrapolate out what that evil is, right? What is that part of you that's coming out? Because if you can get to detail it out more clearly, then we can get to the flaws, because it's not like there's pure evil in there. It's just emotion can be built up, but the emotion's building up for a particular reason. As I understand my previous trading experiences, interactions with the markets and beliefs created some hardwired patterns in my mind. To correct that, I have to find what's flawed and learn to change it, or identify, accept, and learn to use it as information, or possibly ignore it in my trading. No, do not identify, accept, and learn to use it as information and ignore it. We need to get to the flaws. The flaws might eventually be related to a lack of acceptance, but what's that lack of acceptance coming from, right? It could be a lack of knowledge, but that's where we're going to kind of focus more first. What's the difference between fear and FOMO? I mean, fear, again, these are just kind of buckets for how people describe it, but fear is like the general category, and FOMO would just be one example of a type of fear. I believe I'm mixing the different emotions, just seeing how do I know if hating to lose is not fear or a discipline issue, right? Well, discipline issues are going to come because pure discipline issues generally are going to come because there's a lack of energy, a lack of emotion. Whereas if the emotions are too intense, and it could be anger related and not fear, there's oftentimes a very distinct link between those 2 points. But I think the more you pay attention to it, the more you'll see the differences. All right, so we've gone quite a bit long here. Maybe I'll just take just a handful more. I know there's a bunch here left. And so if there are, some significant, let me just see what else is here. Okay. So if we recognize that our pre-market prep, that our emotional volatility is far from center, are we better off skipping the day or switching to sim and see if we can work through it? It's a judgment call on your part, right? You could use it as a pure learning experience, right? If you're not mapping the patterns, if you're not kind of digging into it enough, if you want to use your emotional volatility to better understand, sure. But yeah, I'd suggest that you're doing something actively to get yourself in a better spot. Otherwise, it could be, like you're effectively kind of gambling. All right.
We can maybe open up a Q&A thread on the forum and address them that way. I think, I think that would be good.
Yeah, I can do that as well. Some of these are actually repetitive. All right, so Ron's asking, what do you mean by levels of anger? Like, what is level 1 versus level 10? So level 1 would be the smallest amount of anger that you're experiencing. Level 10 would be the most amount that you could experience in general, right? Moment to moment, you're not going to experience all, 10 levels. But over time, right, some days you might get to level 6, only experience a couple small mistakes, and then a trade goes in your favor, and like instantly you calm back down. But we're looking to understand like what your anger has the potential to get to right now. And so level 10 would be the worst amount of anger or the most intense level of anger you could experience, because every single day you trade, it is possible for you to get to that point, right? If the circumstances line up, right, you can get to that point. And so you want to kind of map what is the smallest amount, what is slightly more than that at level 2 and 3, what is more than that at level 4 and 5, and then, all the way down to level 10. Curious why you have a page for greed, even after you kind of de-emphasized it. Because again, like, it's not about me, it's about you. So from my standpoint, I de-emphasize greed, but if you prioritize it, go for it. I want to make sure that we're kind of working with your issues. Right. Can you comment on the differences in the emotional state of a trader who is an active intraday trader but flat at the end of the day versus a swing trader who will be in a position for days, weeks, months, and how your course can be applied to each type of trader? Yeah, so the intraday, I think, is kind of what we've talked about primarily today, but you certainly can be mapping emotions as they occur in sort of the after hours, trades. I mean, certainly as you're holding positions overnight for days or weeks, right? The long or the sort of slow moving ways that trades can kind of play out, right, can cause a variety of different emotions at different times. But the bottom line is, right, the whole thing that we're trying to map is not wholly different, right? It's just experienced over different time frames. So your ability to kind of map does not change just because of what you're trading. It's just going to change in the way in which it sort of shows up in the time frames that occurs. All right, I'm going to look at one more question, and then we'll call it a day for today. Let's see. I feel that my core emotions are triggered since I'm looking for validation of my trade setup, intellectual prowess through P&L. How do I map that emotion? Validation generally is a confidence thing. So what you're going to look for is when you maybe are kind of more focused on P&L, the mistakes that you're making around this, right, are going to occur at times. And when you see that, then you're going to look at the thoughts that are coming up in that moment. So again, when you think about mapping the emotion, sometimes, again, it can be hard to, if you don't actually experience or feel the emotion, to know how to map it. Look for all the other stuff. That's really what's going to kind of help you. And then eventually maybe you'll feel the emotion, but if not, it's okay. Just focus on what you do see. That is really the key to kind of getting past this. So, all right, y'all, we're, 53 minutes over. So I was a little wrong in my sense there, but great questions, great interaction here. I expect, again, next webinar to be me doing a lot less talking from a lecturing standpoint, and more interesting from a, this is the stuff that you really need help with. And, a lot of good questions here. So, we're going to keep kind of working through this, and forums will be open, post some stuff there. Need that homework, right? Send it in as soon as you have it. Wednesday, the 20th is the deadline. Work on the other stuff I also talked about. So not just the mapping, right? Work on your optimal mindset and defining that. Start asking the why questions around the things you're experiencing. And we're just going to kind of keep digging into the trenches here and get it done, right? We're just one step out of 5, and there's a lot more work to do. So get after it, and we'll take care of it next time.
Yeah, perfect. I thought that was an awesome Q&A. Great questions from you guys. Great answers from Jared. I think if we keep bringing the same level of energy, it's awesome. We still got the majority of people in here, even 53 minutes over. So that tells you, and I see a lot of thank yous in the chat. So definitely go ahead and shoot us any feedback you have on how we can make the rest of this experience better. Give us your biggest takeaway on Twitter. We'd love to see that as well. And with that said, I think have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Put in that work, do that homework, submit it, and we'll have some fun. So thanks so much, everybody, and take care. Bye.